Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the worn sandals of a Roman slave in the 1st century AD, and spoiler alert, it's not exactly the glamorous antiquity you see in Hollywood. Picture this. You're waking up before dawn in a cramped room that smells like unwashed bodies and yesterday's cooking smoke, knowing that your entire day belongs to someone else. Your body, your time, your future, none of it is yours. You probably won't survive to old age, statistically speaking, but hey, at least you'll get really good at reading your master's moods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first grey light of dawn hasn't even touched the narrow window slit above you, but you're already awake. Not because you want to be. Your body learned long ago that sleeping past the master's waking means trouble you can't afford. The slave quarters where you sleep are tucked into the back corner of your owner's townhouse, a cramped room that houses anywhere from 5 to 15 slaves depending on the household size. Your property, sure, but even property has its pecking order. You shift on your thin sleeping mat, feeling the cold creep up from the stone floor beneath you. That's the thing about being at the bottom of the slave hierarchy. You don't get the slightly elevated sleeping shelf along the wall. That privilege belongs to the villicus, the head steward who manages the household slaves, and maybe the master's personal body slave if he's feeling generous. They get actual wooden bed frames, threadbare blankets that are only mostly moth-eaten, and the crucial advantage of being a few precious inches away from the floor's bone-chilling cold. You, on the other hand, sleep where the draft hits hardest. The room smells like humanity packed too tightly together. Sweat, breath, the faint tang of the communal chamber pot in the corner that someone forgot to empty last night. There's going to be hell to pay for that when the villicus notices. You've learned to sleep through the sounds. Marcus is snoring. Little Julia whimpering in her sleep. She's only 8 and still cries for the mother she was sold away from. The scritch-scratch of rats in the walls. Historians still argue whether urban household slaves had it better than their rural counterparts in the agricultural estates, but right now, listening to those rats, you're not convinced either option is winning any prizes. The hierarchy in this room is invisible but absolute. The villicus sleeps nearest the door, a position of both authority and responsibility since he's the first one who'd face any nighttime intrusion. Next to him, the master's capsarius, the slave, who maintains his wardrobe and personal effects, gets the second best spot. Then come the kitchen slaves who have to wake earliest anyway, so they might as well be close to the door. The pedagogue who tutors the master's children gets a middle position. Educated slaves occupy a weird liminal space, where they're still property but slightly more valuable property. And then there's you, along with the other general labourers, pressed against the far wall where the morning cold hits first and lingers longest. You can hear the city starting to wake outside. Rome never truly sleeps, but it does quiet down to a dull roar between midnight and dawn. Now the streets are coming alive again. The rumble of delivery carts, the only wheeled vehicles allowed in the city during daylight hours, which is precisely why they're all rushing to finish their routes. The bark of a dog, someone's distant argument already reaching full volume. The insulae, those towering apartment blocks where free Romans and freed slaves cram into increasingly dangerous heights, are starting their daily chorus of chamber pots being emptied into the streets below. You'd find it disgusting if you weren't so used to it. Here's a fun fact that might gross you out mid-drift to sleep. Those chamber pots, they're not just for nighttime. In a city of 1 million people with minimal public toilets, they're essential infrastructure. And guess whose job it will be to empty your master's? Hint, it's probably you. The slave next to you, Gaius, a fellow general labourer who's been in the household for 6 years, starts to stir. You've learned to read the subtle shifts in the room's energy. Soon the villicus will wake, and within moments he'll be rousing everyone else with sharp commands, and perhaps a strategic kick to anyone moving too slowly. Better to be up and alert when that happens. Looking eager never saved anyone from a beating, but looking lazy has definitely earned plenty. You sit up carefully, your back protesting. You're maybe 20 years old, but you feel ancient some mornings. The work, constant, physical, unrelenting, has a way of aging you faster than it should. Your tunic is twisted around your body from sleep, the rough wool scratchy against your skin. It's the only one you own. The master provides 1 tunic per slave per year, and if you wear it out before then, well, That's your problem to solve. The window slit is showing the barest hint of lighter darkness now. Not quite dawn, but close enough that you need to be ready. You know the master's routine like you know your own heartbeat, because your life literally depends on anticipating his needs. He'll wake soon, call for wine mixed with water, expect his breakfast prepared exactly as he likes it, demand his house be spotless before he even considers stepping outside. One scholarly debate that nobody asked for, but here we are anyway. Some historians argue that household slaves in wealthy Roman homes had access to better food, shelter, and even medical care than many free poor citizens. Others point out that no amount of scraps from the master's table makes up for the small detail of, being literal property. You're living this debate every single day, and honestly, both things can be true and still feel terrible. The Vilicus sits up with a grunt. Here it comes, time to transform from sleeping body to working tool. You're already on your feet when his bark cuts through the darkness. Another day of slavery begins. Up! All of you! Up! The Vilicus's voice cuts through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife through butter, except way less pleasant, and with significantly more consequences for moving slowly. You're already standing, which earns you exactly 0 points, but at least avoids a kick. The scramble begins as bodies untangle from sleeping positions, mats are hastily rolled, and everyone tries to look alert despite approximately 4 hours of actual sleep. The mad dash for the communal water basin starts immediately. It sits in the small courtyard adjacent to the slave quarters, a simple stone basin fed by a lead pipe that draws from the city's aqueduct system. In wealthier homes, and your master's definitely qualifies, there's running water, which sounds luxurious until you realise you're still fighting 15 other slaves for access to a single basin, while the sky's barely thinking about turning grey. You move quickly, knowing the hierarchy even here determines everything. The Vilicus goes first, naturally. He splashes water on his face with the leisurely pace of someone who knows nobody's rushing him. The Capsarius goes next, taking his time because he has to look presentable when dressing the master. Then the pedagogue, the kitchen supervisor, the door slave who will greet visitors. The pecking order is so ingrained you could map it in your sleep, which, let's be honest, you practically do. By the time it's your turn, the water's already got that cloudy look from too many faces, and dawn is genuinely threatening to arrive. You splash quickly, face, neck, arms. And here's where it gets interesting. Romans are famously obsessed with bathing, right? The thermae, those grand public bathhouses, are practically temples to cleanliness. But that's for citizens, for people, for slaves, especially lower-tier household slaves like you. This basin is it. This is your bathing. Once a week. If you're lucky and the master's feeling generous, you might get access to the household's private bath after everyone else has used it. The water will be cold by then, possibly murky, definitely uninviting, but it beats nothing. Most slaves go to the public baths on their rare free time, if they can scrape together the quarter's entrance fee and if their master permits it. You went once last month. It was glorious for approximately 30 minutes before you remembered you had to come back to this life. Here's a fun quirk of Roman sanitation that'll either fascinate or horrify you. Those fancy public toilets with the communal sponge on a stick for wiping. They're shared. Like you use it, rinse it in the channel of running water, and the next person uses it. Suddenly, this cloudy basin water doesn't seem quite so bad, does it? You're toweling off, and by toweling, I mean using a rag that might generously be called cloth. When you notice young Marcus struggling with his tunic, he's new, maybe 2 months in the household, still adjusting to the reality that nobody's going to help him get dressed anymore. His mother probably dressed him until the day he was sold. Now he's fumbling with fabric while the Vilicus glares with the kind of impatience that precedes violence. You catch his eye, demonstrate quickly how to wrap and tie the tunic properly. He mimics you, gets it mostly right. The Vilicus looks away. Crisis averted. You've just potentially saved the kid from starting his day with bruises, and your reward is absolutely nothing, because that's how this works. But you remember being new. Remember that bewildering transition from whoever you were before to property, so you help when you can. Your own tunic is a simple affair. Undyed wool, reaching to about mid-calf, belted at the waist with a cord. That's it. No undergarments, no layers, no options. In winter, you freeze. In summer, you sweat through it by mid-morning. The quality of the wool tells everyone exactly what you are. The coarse weave, the lack of colour, the obvious cheapness of the material. Citizens wear togas for formal occasions, tunics of finer linen or wool for daily wear, often dyed in colours that cost more than your worth. Their clothes fit properly. Yours is deliberately shapeless. One size fits nobody. Designed to last through a year of hard labour and not one day longer. Historians still argue whether slaves were legally forbidden from wearing certain colours or styles, or if it was just understood social convention that kept you in undyed, shapeless garments. Either way, the effect is the same. You're marked by what you wear before you even open your mouth. The kitchen slaves are already rushing off, knowing their domain needs to be operational before the master even thinks about breakfast. The Capsarius hurries toward the master's private chambers. The pedagogue moves more slowly. Lessons don't start until mid-morning, but he still goes, presumably to review whatever he's teaching the master's spoiled children today. You've seen those kids. They treat you like animated furniture, which is honestly better than active cruelty, so you'll take it. You finish fastening your belt, making sure the tunic hangs evenly enough that you won't get criticised for sloppiness. Appearance matters in this household. The master likes his slaves to look neat, if not exactly prosperous. It's part of the display, the performance of Roman household management. A well-run household with well-presented slaves reflects well on the master's status and organisational skills. Your feet are bare, will stay bare most of the day. In winter, you might get permission to wrap them in rags, actual shoes. Those are for skilled slaves, for the ones who leave the house on errands, for anyone whose frostbitten feet might impair their ability to work. You're not there yet on the hierarchy. Maybe never will be. The stone floor is cold enough that you shift from foot to foot, a little dance of discomfort that's so automatic you barely notice you're doing it. The courtyard's brighter now. The sun still not visible, but its arrival undeniable. Birds are starting their racket. The city's fully awake. You can hear the distinctive cry of the bread seller already making his rounds, the rattle of shop shutters being opened, life happening all around you in a freedom you'll never touch. Time to start your actual work. The fun's just beginning. Your stomach reminds you it exists with an impressively loud growl that echoes slightly in the courtyard. Breakfast, if you can dignify it with that name, happens now in the chaotic 20-minute window before the household fully activates. You head toward the kitchen area, joining the flow of other slaves who've learned that eating quickly is a survival skill more valuable than almost anything else. The kitchen is already a scene of controlled chaos. The Kalina occupies a dangerous position in any Roman townhouse. Necessary, hot, smoky, and perpetually on the verge of burning the whole place down. Open flames, clay ovens, the ever-present risk of fire in a city built largely of wood and hope. The kitchen slaves are already sweating despite the early hour, their faces flushed from the heat as they prepare the master's morning meal. And what a meal it's going to be. You can see the preparations even as you grab for your own food. Fresh bread, olives, cheese, possibly some cold meat left from last night's dinner, fruit imported from gods know where at gods know what expense. The master likes to break his fast in style, especially if he's entertaining clients this morning. Everything must be perfect, presented on the good pottery, served at exactly the right temperature. Your breakfast, by contrast, sits in a communal bowl near the door. Bread. Yesterday's bread, specifically. The coarse, dark kind made from the cheapest grain, baked in bulk 2 days ago, and already achieving that special density that makes your jaw work over time. You grab a chunk, maybe a quarter of a small loaf, and that's it. That's breakfast. Well, okay, there's also the posca. This delightful beverage is basically wine gone wrong, so sour and vinegary that no self-respecting citizen would drink it. Mixed with water and maybe some herbs if the kitchen slaves are feeling fancy. It's the standard drink for slaves, soldiers, and anyone else at the bottom of Roman society. Does it taste good? Absolutely not. Does it keep you hydrated and provide some minimal calories? Barely. Will you drink it anyway? Because water straight from the pipes can be dodgy and wine is for people who aren't property? You bet. Here's your fun historical fact for the day. Romans didn't really do breakfast as a major meal. The antaculum, or morning meal, was meant to be light even for wealthy citizens. Breaking your fast with too much food was considered somewhat uncouth. The real action happened at dinner. But here's the thing. When you're facing a day of physical labour that'll burn through calories like a furnace through kindling, this chunk of bread and cup of sour water wine isn't exactly setting you up for success. You eat standing up, one eye on the kitchen activity because watching the pecking order here is better than theatre. The head cook, a Greek slave named Philippos, who's been with the household for 15 years, rules this domain with an iron spoon. Literally. He's been known to smack people with cooking implements. He's shouting instructions in a mixture of Latin and Greek, his native language slipping through when he's stressed, which is basically always during meal preparation. Below him, 3 kitchen slaves scramble to execute his vision. There's the Fakaria, the slave specifically responsible for tending the oven and fire. It's hot, dangerous work. Burns are an occupational hazard, and you've seen her arms scarred from sparks and errant coals. Then the 2 general kitchen assistants who chop, stir, fetch, clean, and generally do whatever Philippos demands at volume. They're preparing eggs right now, and the smell is simultaneously wonderful and torturous, because you know none of those eggs are for you. The master likes his eggs soft-boiled, served with a sprinkle of that expensive pepper from the Far East that costs more per ounce than you're worth per year. The bread being warmed for him is white, fine, made from proper wheat flour that's been sifted multiple times to achieve that delicate texture. You chew your dense brown bread and try not to think about it too hard. The other slaves are grabbing their portions with the same rushed efficiency. You recognize the pattern. Eat fast. Eat now. Because once the day starts properly, there might not be another chance for hours. The midday meal will be similarly rushed, similarly meagre. Everything revolves around the master's needs, the master's schedule, the master's comfort. Young Marcus is struggling with his bread, trying to bite through the crust and nearly losing a tooth in the process. You gesture to show him. Soak it in the posca first. Let it soften just enough to be chewable. He does, grimaces at the taste of the posca but manages to eat. Learning curve, kid. Welcome to the rest of your life. Historians still argue whether Roman slaves were systematically underfed or if they received adequate nutrition for their labour demands. The answer, as you're experiencing firsthand, probably varies wildly by household. Your master isn't deliberately starving you. That would reduce your work capacity and reflect poorly on his household management. But he's also not exactly ensuring you're well nourished. You get enough to function, barely. The bare minimum to keep the property operational. Here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Some wealthy households actually hired professional nutritionists, well, the Roman equivalent, to plan slave diets, treating their human property like expensive livestock that needed proper feeding to maintain value. Your master hasn't bothered with that level of care, but you've heard rumours of households where slaves ate better than poor free citizens. Double-edged sword that, being well-fed property is still being property. The bread sits heavy in your stomach, which is honestly preferable to the alternative of it sitting light or not at all. You drain your cup of posca, enjoying exactly none of it, and wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. Breakfast. Accomplished. The whole affair took maybe 7 minutes. Around you, other slaves are finishing their hurried meals, already mentally transitioning to their assigned tasks. The household is waking up fully now. You can hear footsteps from the upper floors, the murmur of the master's voice calling for his capsarius, the general sense that the day's real work is about to begin. Your stomach still feels empty despite the bread, but that's normal. That's every morning. You've learned to ignore it, to let the hunger fade into background noise along with all the other chronic discomforts of this life. Time to get to work. The floors won't sweep themselves, and you've definitely learned that the master notices unswept floors way more than he notices hungry slaves. The atrium is your first target, because the atrium is always the first target. This central hall with its impluvium, that's the shallow pool designed to catch rainwater from the opening in the roof, is the face of the household, the space visitors see first, the room that makes or breaks the master's reputation for proper household management. Which means it needs to be absolutely, perfectly, immaculately clean before the master emerges from his private chambers. No pressure. You grab a broom from the small storage alcove, and calling it a broom is generous. It's basically bundled twigs tied to a stick, the Roman cleaning technology that hasn't changed in centuries and probably won't change in centuries to come. Effective, sure. Ergonomic, not even a little bit. You start sweeping, working from the edges toward the center, the way you've been taught through a combination of demonstration and sharp corrections. The floor is beautiful, you'll give it that. Mosaic tiles arranged in geometric patterns, each tiny tessera placed by skilled craftsmen who are probably slaves themselves, creating art they'd never own in a home they'd never live in. The irony isn't lost on you as you sweep dust from their handiwork. The tiles are cold under your bare feet. smooth where they're not cracked, and they show every speck of dirt with what feels like malicious clarity. Dust, tracked-in mud from yesterday, a few leaves that blew in from the peristyle garden, something that might be food residue. You sweep it all toward the centre, careful not to miss the corners where dirt loves to hide and where the Vilicus loves to check. He's got this trick where he runs his finger along baseboards and architectural details, then shows you the dust on his fingertip like it's evidence at a trial. Which, in a way, it is. Trial by housekeeping, sentence determined by the master's mood. Here's your mainstream historical fact to ponder while you sweep. Wealthy Roman homes were actually remarkably sophisticated in their design, with running water, underfloor heating systems called hypocausts, and waste removal that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years after Rome fell. You're basically maintaining technology that's more advanced than most of the medieval world will achieve. Does this make your life better? Not even slightly, but it's interesting. The impluvium needs attention next. You set aside the broom and grab a cloth, kneeling at the pool's edge to wipe the marble rim. The water inside catches the early morning light filtering through the compluvium above, creating rippling patterns that would be peaceful if you had any time to appreciate them. You don't. The rim collects grime in a way that seems physically impossible given that it's literally just sitting there, but somehow it manages to look dingy by morning despite being cleaned every evening. You scrub, working your way around the pool's perimeter, and your knees start protesting against the hard floor. The marble is smooth but unforgiving, beautiful but brutal. Everything in this house is like that, designed for aesthetic pleasure without any consideration for the people maintaining it. The frescoes on the walls, gorgeous scenes of mythology and gardens require gentle cleaning with barely damp cloths to avoid damaging the paint. The bronze fixtures need polishing with a mixture of vinegar and ash to keep them gleaming. The furniture, what little there is by modern standards, needs dusting with the kind of care usually reserved for religious artifacts. One wrong move, one scratch, one stain that doesn't come out, and you're facing punishment. The master doesn't hit slaves personally, that would be beneath his dignity, but he doesn't need to. That's what the Vilicus is for, and the Vilicus takes his job very seriously, possibly because his position depends on keeping the household running flawlessly, possibly because he's just that kind of person, probably both. Gaius appears from the tablinum, the master's study, carrying his own cleaning supplies. You exchange the briefest of nods, silent acknowledgement of shared suffering, the slave version of good morning. He's been assigned the study, which means carefully dusting around all those wax tablets and scrolls without disturbing the master's organizational system. You do not envy him. The master notices when his correspondence isn't exactly where he left it. You move to the household shrine next, the lararium where the family's protective spirits supposedly reside. It's a small elevated alcove with painted figures of the lairs and a few small bronze statuettes. This requires special care. Religious spaces demand respect even when you're not entirely sure you believe in these particular gods. Or maybe you do. Religion gets complicated when you're property, when you're not even sure if the gods care about people who aren't legally people. The figurines need polishing. You work carefully, your cloth moving over the bronze with practiced precision. The incense from last night's offerings has left a thin layer of ash that needs removing. There are tiny offering bowls to empty and clean, the ritual crumbs and wine from the family's daily devotions. You handle it all with appropriate reverence, partly from genuine respect for the sacred, partly from sheer self-preservation. Here's a quirky detail that might interest you. Some Roman households had dozens of these protective spirits, and gods they honoured daily, while others were more selective. There's no central religious authority dictating exactly how to worship, which gods to honour, or what rituals to perform. It's delightfully chaotic, actually. Your master honours the standard lairs and penates, plus a few personal favourites, and expects his household to maintain their shrine with military precision. You finish with the lararium and grab your scrubbing tools. The floor, already swept, now needs actual washing in high traffic areas. This means hauling water, mixing it with some kind of cleaning agent, often just ash and water, creating a mildly alkaline solution that cuts through grime, and getting on your hands and knees to scrub. This is the glamorous life of a Roman household slave, folks. Kneeling on cold tile, hands in dirty water, racing the sun's progression to finish before the master wakes up enough to actually look around. Historians still argue whether domestic slaves had more autonomy, and better treatment than agricultural slaves. And honestly, autonomy feels like a strong word when someone owns you and can beat you for missing a spot of dirt. Your back aches, your knees hurt, your hands are getting raw from the cleaning solution. The sun is fully up now, light streaming through the compluvium in a way that cruelly illuminates every remaining speck of dust you've missed. You scrub faster. Of course, not every slave in the Roman Empire gets to enjoy the questionable privilege of scrubbing mosaic floors in a wealthy townhouse. If you think your situation is rough, and it absolutely is, spare a thought for the agricultural slaves working the latifundia, those massive estates that sprawl across the Italian countryside like empires within the empire. Actually, let's do more than spare a thought. Let's step into their sandals for a moment, because context makes everything worse. You're waking up in the ergastulum, which is a fancy Latin word for prison where we keep the slaves who work our fields. It's not technically a prison, the estate owners would argue. It's just a locked barracks with no windows and chains for the particularly troublesome workers. Totally different. The distinction will really comfort you as you shake off sleep, what little you got, and hear the overseer's whistle signalling that dawn has arrived and so is your suffering. The ergastulum smells like concentrated humanity, worse than the urban slave quarters, because there are more of you packed in here and significantly less ventilation. 50, 60, sometimes 100 agricultural slaves crammed into a stone building that was never designed for comfort because comfort is for people, not tools. And make no mistake, on these vast grain estates, you're not even pretending to be anything but a farming implement that needs occasional feeding. You shuffle out into the pre-dawn darkness with the others, a line of exhausted bodies moving toward the fields that stretch to the horizon and beyond. The estate you work is thousands of acres, one of those massive agricultural operations that feeds Rome's endless appetite for grain. The owner lives in the city, naturally. You've never seen him. You've seen the villicus who manages this place, and that's more than enough human contact with authority figures, thank you very much. Here's your historical reality check. By the 1st century AD, these enormous estates worked primarily by slave labour had become the dominant agricultural model in Italy. Small family, farms were dying out, bought up by wealthy Romans who saw land as investment and slaves as cheaper than paid labour. The economics made perfect sense if you didn't think too hard about the human cost, which the owners definitely didn't. Your breakfast, such as it is, gets distributed as you walk. A chunk of bread, coarser than anything the urban slaves eat, and that's it. No posca, no water yet. You'll get water breaks if the overseer's feeling generous, and if it's hot enough that slaves dropping dead from dehydration would hurt productivity. Economic calculus. Always economic calculus. The tools get distributed next. You receive a hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands before yours, the iron blade nicked and stained with the red soil you'll be attacking all day. Some slaves get scythes for harvesting, others get mattocks for breaking ground, still others get those massive ploughs that require multiple slaves to operate. You've done plough work. It's exactly as terrible as it sounds. Human beings yoked together like oxen because oxen are expensive and slaves are, well, everywhere. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're already in the fields, the overseer and his assistants positioned to watch for anyone slacking. They carry whips. Not decorative whips, not symbolic whips. Actual leather whips that leave actual scars. The message is clear. Work or suffer. Usually both. You start hoeing. The repetitive motion, lift, swing, strike, pull, lift, swing, strike, pull, will define your entire day. You're weeding between rows of grain that's already knee-high, removing any plant that isn't wheat, breaking up soil, creating proper drainage channels. It's mindless work, which sounds like it might be easy, but mindless doesn't mean effortless. Your shoulders start burning within an hour. By midday, they'll be screaming. The field stretches out before you in rows so long you can't see the end. You'll work this row, then the next, then the next, then the next, covering maybe an acre or two per day if you're efficient. The estate has hundreds of acres. The math is depressing, so you don't do it. You just hoe. Here's a quirky detail that the agricultural writers of the period actually recorded. Some estate owners literally calculated the exact caloric intake needed to keep field slaves working at maximum efficiency without wasting money on excess food. They approached feeding human beings the way you'd approach feeding livestock, which is not a metaphor. They used the same accountants for both. The sun rises, and with it comes the heat. Summer in the Italian countryside is no joke. You're sweating through your tunic before the morning is half done, the fabric clinging to your skin in ways that would be uncomfortable if you had the luxury of caring about comfort. You don't. You care about maintaining the pace, about not catching the overseer's attention, about surviving to sunset. Water break comes mid-morning, maybe. The assistant overseer walks. Along the rows with a bucket and ladle. You get one ladle. One. You gulp it down, feel it hit your stomach, immediately want more. The bucket moves on. Get back to work. Your hands are already blistering, which is impressive considering they're calloused enough to qualify as leather. New blisters on old calluses, the agricultural slave's eternal reality. Blood mixes with dirt, mixes with sweat, creating a paste that coats your palms and makes the hoe handle slippery. You grip harder, keep working, because stopping isn't an option. Lunch, when it finally comes, is another chunk of bread and maybe some onions. Raw onions, because cooking is for people who aren't working fields. You eat standing up, too exhausted to care about taste, just grateful for the 20-minute break. Some slaves collapse right there in the field, too tired to do anything but lie in the dirt they've been tilling. The overseer circles like a shark, making sure nobody's actually sleeping, making sure this break doesn't extend beyond its allotted time. Historians still argue whether agricultural slaves faced higher mortality rates than urban slaves, or if the data is just incomplete. From where you're standing, well, hoeing, the question seems academic. You've seen slaves die. Heat stroke, exhaustion, infected wounds that never got proper treatment, accidents with tools or equipment. The estate replaces them the way you'd replace broken tools. Back to work. The afternoon is worse than the morning because you're already tired and the heat is at its peak. The hoe feels like it weighs 100 pounds. Your back is one continuous scream of pain, but you swing, strike, pull, lift, swing, strike, pull, because that's what you do. That's all you do. That's all you are. A machine made of meat and bone and desperation. You understand now why urban household slaves, with all their complaints about cold floors and strict masters, are basically living in luxury. At least they're inside. At least they get variety in their tasks. At least they're not hoeing a field under a sun that seems personally angry at them. The fields stretch on forever. Your back will hurt forever. This day will last forever. Welcome to agricultural slavery. It's exactly as bad as advertised. But let's step back from those nightmare fields and return to the urban environment, specifically to a much stranger position in the slave hierarchy, the skilled craftsman. Imagine being valuable enough that your master invested years of training into you, skilled enough that you do work free citizens actually respect, but still property, still owned, still able to be sold, beaten, or killed at your master's discretion. It's a special kind of psychological torment that makes the regular kind of slavery look almost straightforward. You're a pister, a baker, one of perhaps a dozen skilled slaves in your master's household. Your hands, covered in flour right now as you knead dough in the pre-dawn kitchen, are worth serious money. Not to you, obviously. To your master. You represent an investment, training that started when you were maybe 10 years old, learning the mysteries of fermentation and oven temperatures from the previous baker who your master owned before you. The dough under your hands is alive in a way that still fascinates you after all these years. You're making bread for the master's breakfast, but this isn't the coarse stuff the general labourers choke down. This is fine white bread, made from wheat flour that's been sifted so many times it's basically silk. You add the right amount of water, work the dough with practiced rhythm, feel it transform from shaggy mass to smooth elasticity under your palms. The oven is already hot, you lit it an hour ago, knowing exactly how long it needs to reach the perfect temperature. Too cool and the bread won't rise properly, too hot and you'll burn the bottom before the inside cooks through. You've made these calculations so many times they're instinctive now. Muscle memory combined with a kind of knowledge that takes years to accumulate. Here's the thing about being a skilled slave. You do work that matters. Citizens eat your bread and compliment its quality. Your master brags about your abilities to his guests, showing you off like a prize racehorse. My baker, he'll say, trained by a Greek master baker, worth at least 3,000 denarii. You're right there, listening to yourself being appraised like furniture, valuable furniture, but furniture nonetheless. The cognitive dissonance is enough to make your head spin if you think about it too hard, which is why you mostly don't. You focus on the bread instead. Other skilled slaves have it even weirder. Take Demetrius, your master's Greek pedagogue, the slave who tutors the master's children in literature, philosophy, and mathematics. Demetrius knows more about Homer than most senators, can recite entire passages of Greek philosophy from memory, teaches the master's sons the cultural refinement that marks them as properly educated Roman elites. He's brilliant, educated, culturally sophisticated, and he sleeps in the slave quarters just like you. Or consider Quintus, the copyist who maintains your master's library and produces copies of texts on commission. His handwriting is absolutely beautiful, his knowledge of literature extensive, his ability to spot textual errors in manuscripts genuinely impressive. Free scribes charge premium rates for the work he does. Your master charges those same premium rates for Quintus's work and keeps every coin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Skilled slaves represented a significant economic force in the Roman Empire, dominating certain professions to the point where free craftsmen struggled to compete. Why pay a free baker when you can buy a trained slave baker once and get decades of labour? The math works beautifully if you're the owner, less beautifully if you're the free baker trying to feed your family or, the slave. You shape the dough into loaves, your hands moving with the confidence of expertise. Each loaf needs to be identical. The master appreciates consistency. You place them on the wooden peel, slide them into the oven with a practiced motion that looks effortless but took years to master. The heat hits your face, intense even from several feet away. You'll have scars on your forearms from times you miscalculated, times the oven bit back. The weird thing about your position, well, one of many weird things, is the small freedoms that come with specialization. You're trusted with sharp knives because you need them for your work. You handle fire daily because baking requires it. You make decisions about ingredients, timing, technique, exercising judgment that would be unthinkable for a general laborer. The master trusts your expertise because his breakfast depends on it. But that trust has sharp boundaries. You're trusted with knives in the kitchen, not outside it. You're trusted to make bread, not to make decisions about your own life. It's freedom-flavoured slavery, all the responsibility with none of the actual autonomy. The bakery, your domain within the larger household, smells amazing right now. Baking bread, olive oil, herbs you've mixed into specialty loaves for tonight's dinner party. These are smells free Romans pay to experience, aromas that draw customers to commercial bakeries throughout the city. You create them, live with them, get no particular credit for them. Historians still argue whether skilled slaves had opportunities for social mobility that other slaves lacked, whether their training and value translated into better treatment or merely higher prices at auction. The answer, from your lived experience, is yes and no simultaneously. You're less likely to be casually beaten. Damaging valuable property is poor economics. You're more likely to be sold if your master needs cash, precisely because you're valuable. Everything cuts both ways. You check the bread, judging doneness by colour and smell, and the subtle sound the crust makes when you tap it. Perfect. You pull the loaves from the oven, set them to cool on racks, and immediately start the next batch because there's always a next batch. The household eats a lot of bread, the master entertains frequently, and your productivity is constantly monitored even if nobody's standing over you with a whip. Here's a quirky detail. Some wealthy Romans actually loaned out their skilled slaves to other households, essentially running a rental service for specialized labor. Your master could hire you out for a wedding or feast, collect the fee, and you'd go do skilled work for someone else while receiving exactly none of the payment. It's like being freelance, except someone else keeps your earnings. Fantastic system, really. The pedagogue Demetrius appears in the kitchen doorway looking for morning bread. You hand him a loaf, still warm because you're not a monster, and he nods thanks. No words necessary. You're both occupying this strange space between skilled professional and literal property, both acutely aware of the contradiction, both just trying to survive it. You are valuable, you are trained, you are respected for your craft, and you are still, fundamentally, completely, legally, a thing that someone else owns. The bread is excellent, that has to be enough. The smell of the bakery fades as your mind drifts somewhere you try not to go very often. Back to the day you became property. Not born property like young Marcus or little Julia, but made property, standing on the auction block in the forum while strangers decided what you were worth. The memory ambushes you sometimes, usually when you're doing something mundane like kneading dough or sweeping floors, and suddenly you're right back there, naked and terrified. The slave market in Rome, several of them actually, but you remember the one near the Temple of Castor, operates with the casual efficiency of any other commercial transaction. Livestock gets sold nearby, pottery, fabric, human beings. The vendors treat it all with roughly the same level of emotional investment, which is to say none whatsoever. You're standing there with maybe 20 other slaves-to-be, arranged by the dealer to show you off to best advantage. Strip. That's the first command delivered matter-of-factly by the Mangones, the slave dealers who make their living from this trade. Every piece of clothing comes off because buyers want to see exactly what they're purchasing. Check for deformities, assess physical condition, verify you're not hiding whip scars or brands from previous bad behavior. The nakedness is methodical, clinical, designed to reduce you from person to product as efficiently as possible. And it works. Standing there exposed while strangers walk past examining you like you're a horse at auction, you feel the transition happen in real time. Your sense of self, your dignity, your personhood, all of it stripped away along with your clothes. Here's your fun historical fact that's actually horrifying. Slave dealers were legally required to disclose certain defects in their merchandise, including chronic illness, tendency to run away, or suicide attempts. They'd mark these with signs or tags, sometimes literally hanging descriptive labels around slaves' necks. Good health, experienced with children, skilled in weaving, recently captured, may attempt escape. You're walking advertisements for your own commodification. Fantastic. A potential buyer approaches you, middle-aged man, well-dressed, calculating eyes. He circles you slowly, appraising, opens your mouth, examines your teeth like you're a donkey, checks your hands for calluses, your back for scars, asks you questions. Where are you from? What skills do you have? How old are you? Can you read? You answer in your best Latin, trying to sound valuable but not threatening, capable but not rebellious. It's a tightrope walk where falling either direction could mean ending up in mines or fields instead of a household. He squeezes your arms, assessing muscle, checks your feet for deformities. The examination is thorough and utterly impersonal. Your meat being graded for quality, and the degradation of it sits in your stomach like a stone. He moves on without buying. Next, potential owner circles through. The Mangones have learned to sell human beings the way they'd sell anything else. Marketing, presentation, strategic information disclosure. They've cleaned you up for sale, oiled your skin to make you look healthier, positioned you in good light. If you had any defects they couldn't hide, they'd have told buyers up front to avoid legal liability. Roman consumer protection laws covered slaves just like any other product. You could be returned if you turned out to be defective merchandise. Think about that. Returned, like spoiled fish. Here's a quirky detail that might make you uncomfortable. Some slave dealers specialized in specific types of slaves. Beauty slaves sold separately from laborers, skilled craftsmen marketed differently than agricultural workers, children sorted by age and training potential. It was an entire industry with specializations and market segmentation strategies that would make modern marketers nod in recognition. An older woman examines you next, asking about your background in that brisk tone of someone who's bought many slaves and knows exactly what questions separate good purchases from bad ones. You tell her what the dealer coached you to say, emphasize trainability, downplay any history that might suggest rebelliousness. She seems interested, negotiates with the dealer, but ultimately walks away. Wrong fit for her household needs, apparently. The wait between examinations is somehow worse than the examinations themselves. Standing there naked while the market flows around you, conversations happening about you but not with you, your future being decided by strangers who'll forget you the moment they leave. You're aware of the other slaves around you in similar circumstances, some stoic, some crying, some seemingly numb with shock. You wonder if you look numb too. You feel numb. Historians still argue whether the Roman slave trade was primarily driven by conquest and war captives, or by breeding and birth within existing slave populations. By the 1st century AD, both sources fed the market, creating a steady supply that kept prices relatively stable and made slavery economically viable for even moderately wealthy households. The infrastructure supporting this trade, the markets, the dealers, the legal frameworks, was sophisticated and thoroughly normalized. Hours pass. The sun moves across the sky. Your legs ache from standing. Several more potential buyers examine you with varying degrees of thoroughness and interest. The dealer adjusts your asking price based on market activity, reading buyer interest like a merchant reads any commodity flow. You're expensive enough to suggest quality, but not so expensive you're unaffordable. Middle market merchandise. Then your current master appears. Not your master yet, just another potential buyer, but you'll learn his face well enough in the coming years. He's methodical in his examination, asks intelligent questions about your background and capabilities, negotiates, competently but not cruelly with the dealer. Money changes hands, a bill of sale gets written. And just like that, you belong to someone new. The dealer hands you a rough tunic. You're allowed to be a person again, at least in the sense of being clothed, and your new master's slave escort leads you toward your new life. You walk through the forum in a daze, past temples and government buildings and free citizens going about their day, completely unaware that you just experienced one of the most dehumanizing moments of your life 100 yards from where they're buying vegetables. That memory never really leaves you. It sits there in the back of your mind, surfacing at random moments to remind you exactly what you are in the eyes of Roman law and society. Property, merchandise, a thing that was sold. You shake your head, pulling yourself back to the present, back to the kitchen where bread needs baking and work needs doing. The past can't be changed, only endured. The morning's work blurs into a series of repetitive tasks until finally, the sun reaches its peak and the household pauses for the midday meal. It's not quite a break, more like a strategic refueling stop where human machinery gets just enough fuel to keep functioning through the afternoon. You set down whatever you're doing, in your case, polishing bronze fixtures until your reflection stares back accusingly, and head toward the kitchen with the general migration of exhausted bodies. The meal is pulse, which is the Roman word for porridge we feed to people we don't particularly care about. It's a thick mixture of barley or wheat boiled with water, maybe some vegetables if the kitchen slaves are feeling generous or had leftovers to use up. No meat, no cheese, no flavour beyond vaguely grain-like. You get a bowl of this glop ladled from a large communal pot, grab a hunk of bread if there's any left from breakfast, and find a spot to sit. The slave quarters courtyard becomes an impromptu dining area, bodies arranging themselves according to the social dynamics that develop in any forced community. You find your usual spot near Gaius and a few other general labourers settling onto the ground because furniture is for people who aren't property. The stone is warm from the midday sun at least. Small mercies. Think we'll make it to dinner without anyone getting beaten? Gaius asks around a mouthful of pulse. It's become a running joke among you, this morbid gambling on who'll catch the Villicus's wrath today. The odds shift based on various factors. The master's mood, whether any important visitors are expected, if anything went wrong this morning, general atmospheric tension levels. Marcus forgot to refill the water basin after washing, you mention, nodding toward the kid who's sitting apart looking miserable. Villicus noticed. "Ooh, that's a paddling," someone mutters, using the phrase that's become darkly comedic code for the inevitable punishment. The Villicus has a paddle he's fond of, thick leather wrapped around wood, that he employs for minor infractions. For major ones, well, there's always the whip. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman law actually specified limits on how masters could punish slaves, at least in theory. Extreme cruelty was supposedly frowned upon, and by the 1st century AD there were some legal protections against the most egregious abuses. In practice, these laws were enforced about as well as you'd expect when the victims are property and the perpetrators are their owners, which is to say, barely at all. The pulse tastes like sadness and texture, which is pretty much what you expected. You eat it anyway because calories are calories and the afternoon shift will burn through whatever energy this provides. The bread helps, giving your jaw something more interesting to work on than mush. Around you, the courtyard fills with quiet conversation, the kind of talk that happens when people are too tired to be loud but need the human connection anyway. "Heard the master's hosting a big dinner party next week," Demetrius the pedagogue mentions, settling down nearby. Even the skilled slaves eat the same pulse, though they get slightly larger portions. Hierarchy extends to portion sizes naturally. Means extra work for everyone. A collective groan ripples through the group. Dinner parties are exhausting. The preparation, the serving, the cleaning afterward that extends well into the night. But there are also opportunities, in a weird way. Sometimes there are leftover delicacies. Sometimes the master is in such a good mood from successful entertaining that he's less likely to notice minor infractions. Sometimes visiting slaves from other households bring news, gossip, information about the wider world beyond these walls. Who's he trying to impress this time, you ask? Potential business partners? Something about shipping contracts and grain imports? Demetrius shrugs. I caught fragments while tutoring the boys. They're excited because the visitors have sons their age. The conversation drifts to safer topics. Nothing too critical of the master. Nothing that could be reported back if anyone's feeling vindictive or trying to curry favour. You've learned that even among slaves, trust has limits. Young Marcus approaches your group hesitantly, still looking worried about his morning mistake. Sit, kid, Gaius says, making room. Eat. Whatever happens, happens. No point starving yourself over it. Marcus sits, takes a bowl of pulse from the kitchen slave making rounds with refills. His hands shake slightly. First major mistake. Probably his first real punishment coming. You remember that feeling, the dread, the waiting, the knowledge that pain is inevitable, but not knowing exactly when it'll arrive. The anticipation is sometimes worse than the actual beating. Here's a quirky detail about slave discipline. Some masters kept detailed records of infractions and punishments, maintaining ledgers that tracked each slave's behavior like a modern HR file from hell. Your master isn't quite that organized, but the Villicus definitely has a mental catalogue of who's messed up recently and who's due for correction. It won't be that bad, you tell Marcus, which is probably a lie but might comfort him anyway. You're new, he'll take that into account. Probably just the paddle, maybe extra duties. You don't mention that the paddle hurts plenty, or that extra duties when you're already exhausted might be worse than the actual hitting. The midday break is maybe 30 minutes total, and you're already halfway through it. Bodies around the courtyard are at various stages of eating and resting, some slaves lying back with eyes closed, catching a few minutes of actual rest. The pedagogue is reading something, because apparently even lunch breaks are educational opportunities for some people. The Capsarius is meticulously cleaning his fingernails, maintaining the grooming standards expected of someone who handles the master's personal effects. Historians still argue whether Roman slavery allowed for meaningful relationships and community among slaves, or if the conditions were too oppressive, the turnover too high, the system too dehumanizing. The answer, from where you're sitting eating terrible porridge with people who understand your specific suffering, is obviously both. You have relationships, you have community. It's just all happening within a framework of horror. The conversation turns lighter. Someone's recounting a funny incident from the market yesterday. Something about a citizen slipping in street filth and landing in a spectacular sprawl. It's mean-spirited humour, but humour nonetheless, the kind of laugh-so-you-don't-cry comedy that gets you through days like this. You contribute your own story about the master's son utterly botching a Greek recitation this morning, much to Demetrius's barely concealed frustration. The Villicus appears at the courtyard entrance, and the mood shifts instantly. Everyone sits straighter, conversation dies mid-sentence, the brief illusion of rest evaporating. He scans the group, eyes landing on Marcus. The kid goes pale. You, kitchen duties, extra water hauling until sunset. Marcus nods, sets down his half-finished poles and follows the Villicus away. No beating, at least not yet. Just extra work, which honestly might be the preferred outcome. You exchange glances with Gaius. Assessment delivered, sentence rendered, crisis averted for now. Breaks over anyway, time to get back to work. The afternoon brings a change of scenery, which sounds exciting until you realise it means the Villicus is sending you out into the streets of Rome on an errand. You're handed a small wax tablet sealed with your master's signet ring, proof that you're on legitimate business and not a runaway, along with instructions to deliver a message to another household across the Escalon Hill and return with a response. Simple enough, except that navigating Rome's streets is like playing a real-life game where the obstacles are trying to kill you and also smell terrible. You step out of the household's entrance onto the cobblestone street, and the sensory assault is immediate. The noise hits first, vendors shouting their wares, carts rumbling over stones, construction somewhere nearby, arguments conducted at full volume because Romans apparently never learned about inside voices. The smell follows quickly, a magnificent blend of human waste, animal dung, rotting garbage, cooking food, unwashed bodies, and the particular tang of a city that hasn't discovered proper sanitation yet, despite having impressive aqueducts. Welcome to Rome, population roughly 1 million, majority of whom are crammed into tenement buildings that would violate every building code ever written if building codes existed. You navigate around a pile of something you're choosing not to identify too closely and start your journey. The master's seal, pressed into the wax of the tablet you're carrying, is basically your permission slip for existing in public. Slaves caught wandering the streets without clear purpose or proof of legitimate business face immediate suspicion. Are you running away? Stealing? Up to no good? The seal answers those questions before they're asked, marking you as property on sanctioned business. It's simultaneously protection and proof of your unfreedom, which pretty much sums up everything about slave life. You dodge a man carrying an implausibly large amphora, those big clay jars used for storing wine, oil, or basically anything liquid, and nearly collide with a woman balancing a basket of fish on her head. The streets are narrow, winding, never designed for the volume of traffic currently crushing through them. Rome grew organically, chaotically, without much planning beyond put buildings wherever they fit, and the result is a maze that would confuse a minotaur. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Rome's streets had no streetlights, no organised traffic flow, no sidewalks in most areas, and wheeled vehicles were banned during daylight hours to reduce congestion. This means all the delivery carts, construction materials and heavy goods moved at night, creating a nocturnal traffic jam while citizens tried to sleep. The system was exactly as terrible as it sounds. You're heading uphill, because of course you are. Rome's famous 7 hills are less charming topographical features and more cardiovascular workout from hell. The Escalin Hill rises before you, and your legs are already protesting from this morning's work. Tough luck, legs. We're going up. The street life is pure chaos. A barber has set up shop right on the sidewalk, well, the narrow strip that might generously be called a sidewalk, and is shaving a customer while their conversation blocks foot traffic. A butcher's stall displays meat in the open air, attracting flies that are having the time of their lives. Street food vendors sell everything from hot sausages to questionable stews, and the aroma is simultaneously appetizing and alarming. Children dart through the crowd playing some kind of game that involves a lot of shrieking and nearly knocking over pedestrians. A dog of indeterminate breeding is enthusiastically marking its territory on a street corner shrine, which seems sacrilegious, but nobody's stopping it. Above you, laundry hangs from upper-story windows, dripping occasionally on passers-by who've learned to walk with an eye skyward. You pass a public fountain where people are gathering water in various containers. There's always a crowd at the fountains, always some kind of social interaction or argument happening. Water is life, and Rome's aqueduct system delivers it in spectacular volume, but accessing it still requires navigating public spaces and public dynamics. You're grateful your household has its own plumbing, even if you're still at the bottom of the basin hierarchy. Here's a quirky detail that might gross you out. Romans didn't have toilet paper, obviously, but they also didn't have the concept of personal space at public toilets. Those famous communal latrines where you sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers doing your business? Totally normal. The shared sponge on a stick for wiping? Standard equipment. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Roman public sanitation makes that look downright reasonable. A patrician's litter passes by, carried by 6 sweating slaves who are having an even worse day than you. The curtains are drawn so you can't see who's inside, but you can see the slaves' faces, exhausted, muscles straining, maintaining the careful, synchronized step that keeps the litter stable. Being a litter bearer is one of those jobs that sounds simple, until you actually try carrying a wealthy Roman plus the elaborate chair they're sitting in through crowded streets while maintaining a smooth ride. Your back hurts just watching them. The tablet in your hand is growing slippery with sweat. You're hyper-aware of it, this small piece of wax and wood that represents your legitimacy. Lose it, and you're just an escaped slave as far as any authority figure is concerned. The punishment for running away is branding if you're caught the first time, worse if it becomes a habit. You've seen branded slaves, the letter F for fugitivus burned into their foreheads, a permanent mark that says, "I tried to be free and failed." You're not running away, you're on an errand. The seal proves it. You're fine. Historians still argue whether urban slaves had more freedom of movement than their descriptions suggest, or if the restrictive laws were actually enforced as written. The reality you're experiencing is somewhere in between. You can move through the city, but always with awareness that your status is precarious, that your right to be here depends on a piece of wax and your master's continued ownership. The address you're seeking appears ahead. a respectable townhouse marked by the standard architectural features of Roman wealth. You approach the door, knock, wait for the door slave to appear. He eyes you through the peephole before opening, checking that you look legitimate enough to admit. "Message for your dominus," you say, holding up the tablet. From the household of... and you name your master, watching recognition flicker across the door slave's face. Your master's reputation precedes him, apparently. The door opens. You step inside, grateful to be off the streets. The interior of this household is familiar in its unfamiliarity. Same basic layout as your master's townhouse, same atrium with impluvium, same mosaic floors, but different details in execution. You're led to wait in the tablinum while the door slave takes your message to his master. Standing there, trying to look appropriately respectful but not suspiciously interested, you can't help but observe the household dynamics playing out around you. A body slave, the master's personal attendant, glides past carrying a tray with bathing supplies, oil flasks, strigils for scraping skin clean, fresh towels, what looks like expensive imported soap. He moves with that particular grace that comes from years of anticipating someone else's every physical need, heading toward what you assume are the private baths. That's a whole different category of slavery right there, and watching him reminds you of your own household's capsarius and the strange intimacy of that role. Body slaves occupy the weirdest position in the slave hierarchy, and you've got time while waiting, so let's think about it. They're closer to their masters than anyone. Literally, physically closer. They wake their owners, dress them, bathe them, attend to bodily functions that free people normally handle privately. They know their masters' bodies better than anyone, see them at their most vulnerable, maintain an intimacy that would be deeply personal if it weren't happening across an ownership boundary that makes it deeply weird instead. The response message arrives quickly. Apparently your master's business partner is efficient. The door slave hands you a sealed tablet in return, and you're dismissed back into Rome's chaotic streets. The return journey is faster because it's downhill, which your tired legs appreciate even as your knees protest the different kind of strain. You dodge the same obstacles in reverse, navigating the urban jungle with the sealed response clutched carefully. Back at your own household, you deliver the message to the villicus, who grunts acknowledgement and dismisses you back to your regular duties. The errand is complete, and now you're back to the grinding mundanity of domestic labour. But that brief glimpse of the other household's body slave has your mind wandering to what that life entails. Your master's capsarius is named Lucius, and he's been in that role for maybe 5 years now. You've watched him work, the careful attention to the master's wardrobe, selecting tunics based on the day's appointments, ensuring every fold drapes correctly. But that's just the visible part. The real work happens in the master's private chambers, in the baths, in the intimate spaces where Lucius attends to needs that make regular slavery look almost dignified by comparison. Morning routine for a body slave starts earlier than yours. Lucius is up before the master wakes, preparing the cubiculum, the private bedroom, for the day. He lays out clothes, ensures washing water is at the perfect temperature, arranges the master's personal effects in the exact configuration expected. When the master wakes, Lucius is there immediately, helping him from bed, assisting with the chamber pot if needed, beginning the elaborate process of turning a sleepy Roman into a presentable citizen. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wealthy Romans had incredibly elaborate grooming routines that required dedicated slave assistants. Morning bathing, oil application, skin scraping with strigils, hair styling, beard trimming if applicable, perfume selection, wardrobe coordination. These weren't simple tasks, but complex rituals that could take hours and required skilled hands. The bathing is where it gets really intimate. Lucius accompanies the master to the private household baths, or the public thermae if the master's feeling social, and handles every aspect of the experience. Undressing the master, managing his belongings, applying oil, using the strigil to scrape away dirt and dead skin, assisting with washing, drying, redressing. It's physically close work that requires touching, lifting, supporting, seeing everything. And it's not just physical proximity, it's knowledge. Body slaves know their masters' bodies intimately. Every scar, every blemish, every physical quirk. They know when the master's gained weight or lost it, when he's aging, when he's sick before anyone else notices. They handle his most private bodily functions without comment, maintaining a professional detachment that must be psychologically exhausting. The psychological dimension is the really weird part. Imagine being closer to someone than their own family, physically, practically, while simultaneously being their property. Lucius dresses the master every morning, knows his clothing preferences better than the master himself probably does, can anticipate needs before they're voiced. That's intimacy. But it's intimacy without equality, closeness without freedom, familiarity that only flows one direction. Here's your quirky historical detail. Some Romans developed genuine affection for their body slaves, treated them almost like confidants or friends, relied on them for emotional support as well as physical service. But that affection existed entirely within the framework of ownership. You can love your dog, value your horse, appreciate your slave's service, and still sell them if circumstances require. The Romans saw no contradiction there. Historians still argue whether body slaves had better lives than other slaves due to their proximity to wealth and power, or worse, lives due to the constant invasion of privacy and total lack of personal boundaries. The answer is probably both, depending on the master's character, which isn't particularly satisfying but reflects reality. Female body slaves have it even more complicated, attending to mistresses in similarly intimate ways, but with additional layers of vulnerability we'll get to later. The ornatrix, the slave who does hair and makeup, spends hours touching her mistress's head, face, body, knowing that one wrong move, a pulled hair, a misplaced pin, could earn a beating. Beauty is serious business, and the slaves who create it bear the pressure. You've seen Lucius moving through the household with that particular posture body slaves develop, simultaneously present and invisible, available but not intrusive, close but distant. He eats the same pulse you do at midday, sleeps in the same slave quarters, but his day is defined by an intimacy you'll never experience and probably don't want to. The master trusts him with his physical person, which is about as deep as trust gets in a slave relationship. But it's still a master and slave, still ownership, still the fundamental inequality that defines every interaction. You're back to scrubbing floors now, your brief adventure into the streets over. The work is mindless, which leaves room for thinking about these weird hierarchies, these different flavors of bondage. At least when you're scrubbing, nobody's touching you. Evening is approaching, and you've finished your assigned tasks early for once, which means you have a rare moment to yourself. You retreat to the small alcove near the slave quarters, where you keep your personal possessions, a laughably grand term for what amounts to a wooden box smaller than your torso. Inside this box is everything you own in the world that isn't technically your master's property, which is a philosophical puzzle that would make Greek philosophers argue for hours. You pull out a small leather pouch, feeling its weight in your palm. The coins inside clink softly. 5 denarii, 8 asses, and 3 sestertii. Your peculium. Your theoretical property that exists in a legal grey zone, where it's sort of yours but also completely not yours, because you're property, and property can't own property. Except, actually, it can, sometimes, if the master permits it, which makes Roman property law as clear as mud. Let's break down this weird system. The peculium is essentially money or property that a master allows a slave to hold and manage. It's not legally yours. If your master decided tomorrow to take it all back, that's completely within his rights. If he sells you, the peculium doesn't automatically come with you unless specifically stipulated. If he dies, it gets complicated. But in practical day-to-day terms, these coins are yours to manage, to spend, to save, to dream about. You earn this money through various means. A few coins came from tips when you ran errands particularly well. Some generous citizen or grateful recipient handed you a quadrans or two. More came from selling small items you were allowed to make in your spare time, though spare time is generous terminology for those 20 minutes between finishing work and collapsing unconscious. The largest amount came from your master himself, occasional small payments for particularly good work or on festival, days when he's feeling generous. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The peculium system was widespread in the Roman Empire and served multiple economic functions. It incentivized slaves to work harder and behave better, provided a mechanism for eventual manumission through self-purchase, and actually expanded the overall economy by creating a class of property-owning property. The Romans accidentally invented a weird form of capitalism that ran on human bondage. Hooray! You count the coins again, even though you know exactly what's there. Math time and its depressing math. Freedom, Manumission through self-purchase typically costs somewhere between 500 and 1,000 denarii for a slave of your general skill level and age. You have 5 denarii in change. At your current savings rate of maybe 2 denarii per year if you're lucky, and don't need to spend any of it on necessities, you're looking at 250 years to buy your freedom. The fact that you'll be dead in probably 30 years makes this timeline somewhat problematic. But you save anyway, because what else are you going to do? Give up. The peculium represents more than just money. It's agency, however limited. It's the ability to make choices, however small. It's the dream of freedom, however mathematically improbable. Some slaves in the household have larger peculia. Demetrius the pedagogue has been saving for a decade and has maybe 150 denarii tucked away, earned through private tutoring he's allowed to do on the side. The baker Philippos has even more, accumulated through selling specialty bread to wealthy clients beyond the household. Skilled slaves can build substantial peculia if their masters are generous and their skills marketable. But here's the quirky detail that makes this system even weirder. Some slaves use their peculia to buy other slaves. Yes, you read that right. Slaves owning slaves. Property owning property owning property. The legal gymnastics required to make this work are spectacular. Technically, the master still owns all of it, but practically the slave manages his own subordinate slaves. It's turtles all the way down, except the turtles are all in chains. You haven't reached that level of economic complexity and probably never will. Your peculium is barely enough to buy a decent pair of shoes, let alone a human being. But you know slaves who've done it, invested their savings in a younger slave, trained them in a trade, then leased out their labour for profit. It's entrepreneurship meets bondage in a combination that would make modern ethicists scream. The coins sit in your palm, warm from your hand. Each one represents hours of extra work, moments of someone's generosity, tiny victories in a life that doesn't offer many. That denarius from last month, that came from delivering a message so quickly the recipient was impressed. Those 3 sestertii, festival gift from the master during Saturnalia, when social norms flip temporarily and masters serve slaves dinner, before the universe returns to its proper horrible order. Historians still argue whether the peculium system ultimately helped slaves achieve freedom, or merely gave them false hope while extracting additional labour. Some scholars point to manumission rates and argue the system worked. Plenty of slaves did buy their freedom. Others note that even freed slaves remained bound to their former masters through patronage obligations. So freedom was always partial. Both things are probably true. You're doing math in your head again, running different scenarios. If you could get hired out for errands more often, maybe earn tips regularly. If you learned a marketable skill in your spare time, maybe the master would let you work on the side. If you lived to 60 instead of dying at 40 like most slaves. If. The calculations always require so many lucky breaks that the probability starts to feel like fantasy. But then you hear stories. That freedman who runs a successful bakery down the street. Former slave who saved for 20 years. The wealthy merchant in the next insula. Freed slave who built a trading empire. These success stories circulate through the slave community like legends, proof that the impossible sometimes happens, that the math occasionally works out despite the odds. You put the coins back in the pouch back in the box back in its hiding spot. Tomorrow you'll wake up and scrub floors and run errands and maybe earn another as or 2 to add to the pile. In 10 years, if you're still alive and still in this household and still saving, you might have 50 denarii. Still nowhere near freedom, but 50 more than 0. The peculium is a trap and a lifeline simultaneously. It keeps you compliant, can't risk punishment that might cost you your savings or get you sold to a master who doesn't allow peculia. But it also gives you something to work toward. Some tiny scrap of control in a life defined by lack of control. You've got your fortune of 5 denarii and dreams of freedom that cost 200 times that amount. The math doesn't work, but you'll keep saving anyway. What else is there? Let's talk about something cheerful now. The comprehensive system of punishment that governs your entire existence. You've developed what you mentally call your danger sense. That tingling awareness that tells you when the atmosphere is shifting toward violence, when someone's about to get hurt. When keeping your head down is the difference between surviving the day intact and not. It's like a 6th sense, except instead of seeing dead people, you're predicting beatings. Much more practical, There's a hierarchy to infractions and corresponding punishments that you've learned through observation and unfortunately experience. At the bottom tier, the minor leagues of messing up, you have verbal abuse. The villicus yelling at you for being slow, the master making a cutting remark about your incompetence, being called stupid or lazy or worthless in front of other slaves. This happens daily to everyone, and you've learned to let it roll off like water off a duck's back. Words can't actually hurt you, the saying goes, which is obviously written by people who've never had their entire sense of self systematically degraded through creative insults. Step up from verbal abuse, we have extra duties. Young Marcus got this earlier for forgetting the water basin, hauling extra water until sunset, scrubbing already clean floors, any task that's physically exhausting and pointless enough to serve as punishment. It's not pleasant, but it's survivable, and at least your body's too tired afterward to stay angry about it. Then we get into the physical punishment tier, and this is where things get interesting in the worst possible way. The paddle comes out for medium-level infractions, breaking something valuable, but not irreplaceable, being late for duties, talking back, never talk back, seriously learn from others' mistakes, general incompetence that crosses from annoying into actionable. The paddle is thick leather wrapped around wood, designed to hurt without causing lasting damage because damaged slaves are less productive slaves. You've been paddled. Everyone has. The villicus administers it with professional efficiency. Bend over, grip your ankles, receive a predetermined number of strikes based on the offence. 5 strikes for minor issues, 10 for moderate ones, occasionally more if he's in a mood or the master specifically requested severity. It hurts. Your backside and thighs bruise purple, sitting becomes agony for days, and the humiliation of being bent over and struck like a misbehaving child never quite fades no matter how many times it happens. Here's your mainstream historical fact that's actually horrifying. Roman law gave masters almost unlimited power to punish slaves however they saw fit, including execution, until some reforms in the 1st century AD placed minor restrictions on killing slaves without cause. Without cause is doing a lot of work in that sentence because I felt like it apparently counted as sufficient cause for most purposes. The whip is for serious infractions, running away, theft, direct disobedience, anything that challenges the master's authority or threatens the household's property. You've never been whipped. You're too smart for that, too careful, but you've watched it happen to others. The whip used isn't symbolic. It's actual leather straps designed to break skin, to leave scars, to create pain so intense that the memory alone serves as deterrent. They tie you to a post in the courtyard where everyone can watch, because punishment is always educational, always performative. The overseer or villicus wields the whip, and the sound it makes, that crack as it breaks the sound barrier before breaking your skin, haunts you even when you're not the one receiving it. The person being whipped usually tries to stay quiet, at first maintaining some shred of dignity, but that never lasts. Everyone screams eventually. The human body has limits, and the whip finds them. Afterward comes the saltwater rinse to prevent infection, which somehow hurts worse than the actual whipping, and then weeks of healing where every movement pulls at wounds that want to stay open. Scars form in crosshatch patterns across backs, legs, wherever the whip landed. You can identify experienced slaves by their scars, read their history written in scar tissue. Here's a quirky detail that showcases Roman practicality. Some masters kept punishment logs, recording each slave's infractions and punishments to track patterns and determine who needed extra discipline versus who was trainable. They approached beating human beings with the same systematic record-keeping they used for agricultural yields. Efficiency. Beyond the whip, there's a category you don't like thinking about. The unthinkable punishments reserved for the worst offences. Attempted murder of the master or his family, serious theft, repeated escape attempts. These result in branding, mutilation, being sold to the mines, which is basically a slow death sentence, or crucifixion. Yes, crucifixion. That famous Roman execution method. Not just for rebels and criminals, slaves who seriously transgressed could end up there too. You've learned to read the signs that violence is coming, developed that danger sense through necessity. The master's voice gets a particular edge when he's angry enough to demand punishment. The villicus's jaw clenches in a specific way before he strikes. The atmospheric pressure in the household changes when someone's transgressed badly enough that an example needs making. You feel it in your gut. that animal awareness that predators are circling. Survival means staying out of the punishment lottery entirely when possible. You double-check your work. You move quickly, but not so quickly that you might break something. You speak when spoken to, answer respectfully, keep your eyes appropriately downcast. You've mastered the slave shuffle, that particular gait that looks busy and purposeful without seeming rushed or threatening. You've also learned the subtle art of deflection. If the master's angry and looking for a target, you make yourself scarce. If the villicus is in a mood, you volunteer for errands that take you outside the house. If there's a collective punishment coming because someone messed up and won't confess, you stay quiet and hope the odds favour someone else becoming the example. Historians still argue whether the threat of punishment was worse than actual punishment, whether the psychological toll of living under constant threat of violence exceeded the physical toll of occasional beatings. From your lived experience, it's not either or. Both are terrible, thanks. The beatings hurt in the moment. The fear hurts constantly. There's a randomness to it that makes the danger sense imperfect. Sometimes you do everything right and still get punished because the master's in a bad mood and you are convenient. Sometimes someone else's infraction results in collective punishment for all slaves in a certain category. Sometimes the villicus just decides it's been too long since anyone was beaten, and administrative discipline is necessary. But there's also predictability. Certain actions always result in certain punishments. The hierarchy is consistent enough to navigate. If you learn the rules, follow them obsessively, and develop that sixth sense for when breaking is about to happen, you can minimize your exposure. Not eliminate it, your property, you have no rights, violence is always a possibility, but minimize it. You watch young Marcus hauling water, exhausted but unbeaten, and feel relief that his punishment stayed in the extra duties category. You've developed protective instincts for the newer slaves, the ones still learning the danger dance. When you can, you warn them, teach them, model the behavior that keeps you mostly safe. The sun's setting. Another day survived with skin intact. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it again, reading the atmospheric pressure, dancing the danger dance, staying one step ahead of the paddle and whip and worse. It's exhausting. But it beats the alternative. There's an aspect of slavery we haven't discussed yet, and it's the one that keeps you awake some nights with a different kind of dread than the paddle or whip. Your body isn't legally yours. That sentence has implications beyond just labour, beyond just punishment, and into territory that makes the other injustices of slavery look almost manageable by comparison. Let's talk about sexual exploitation, because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. Roman law is crystal clear on this point. Slaves cannot be raped. Not because assault doesn't happen, it absolutely does, but because rape is legally defined as a violation of a person's bodily autonomy and dignity, and slaves aren't recognized as having either. Your master owns your body the same way he owns a chair or a cup. What he does with his property is his business. The law doesn't care, won't intervene, offers zero protection. This reality affects everyone, but it affects female slaves differently than male slaves, and we should be honest about that. The young women in your household, the ones who serve in the house, who bring wine, who attend to the mistress, they navigate a constant minefield of vulnerability that you, as a male slave, experience differently. Not that you're safe, mind you. Male slaves face sexual exploitation too, especially younger ones, especially those who catch the eye of masters or guests with particular preferences. But the risk profile is different, the frequency different, the social acceptance different. Here's your uncomfortable historical fact. Sexual access to slaves was considered a normal, unremarkable aspect of slave ownership in ancient Rome. It wasn't scandalous or hidden or whispered about, it was just understood. Masters had concubines from among their female slaves. Mistresses sometimes took male slaves as lovers. Guests at dinner parties might request particular slaves for the night. The only social rule was that freeborn Romans shouldn't be subjected to such treatment. Slaves? Fair game. You've watched the female slaves in your household develop survival strategies. They learn to be invisible when certain guests visit. They know which rooms to avoid at which times. They develop that particular skill of being present but not attractive, available for service but not that kind of service. It doesn't always work. The crying you sometimes hear late at night from the women's sleeping quarters tells you it doesn't always work. The villa's ornatrix, the slave who does the mistress's hair and makeup, is particularly vulnerable. She's young, maybe 16, and she's pretty in exactly the way that attracts dangerous attention. She's learned to make herself less pretty when not actively serving the mistress. No makeup, hair pulled back severely, clothes chosen for shapelessness. Historians still argue whether female slaves in wealthy households faced constant sexual exploitation or if the frequency varied by household culture and master's character, but the Ornatrix's defensive posture suggests she's not taking chances. Male slaves aren't exempt from this reality, and we should be clear about that too. You're in your 20s, not unattractive, and you've learned to navigate situations where guests have made their interest known. The key is deflection without direct refusal. You can't say no to free Romans, not really, but you can be conveniently busy, suddenly needed elsewhere, positioned near other people who might notice. It's a dance as delicate as the danger dance, and failing it has consequences you don't want to think about. There's a hierarchy, even in exploitation. Body slaves, who already have the most intimate access to their masters, often face expectations that extend beyond bathing and dressing. The capsarius in some households is selected partly for attractiveness, partly for the understanding that service might include nighttime visits. It's never explicitly stated. That would be gauche, but everyone understands. Here's a quirky detail that showcases Roman moral flexibility. While sexual relationships between masters and slaves were completely acceptable, passionate love affairs with slaves were considered embarrassing. The distinction was important. Using slaves for sex was fine. Being emotionally invested in them was undignified. So exploitation was encouraged, while anything resembling actual relationship was mocked. Great system. The children born from these encounters complicate everything. If the master gets a slave pregnant, that child is born a slave, property from birth, owned by the same master who fathered them. Some masters free these children, acknowledging paternity and giving them opportunities. Others ignore them entirely, letting their own offspring grow up as slaves in their household. Still others sell them, removing the reminder of indiscretion. The mother has no say in any of it. You know of one such situation in your household, a kitchen slave who has a daughter that looks remarkably like the master's legitimate son. Everyone sees it. Nobody mentions it. The girl works in the kitchen alongside her mother, learning to be invisible, learning to navigate the impossible situation of being both family and property simultaneously. The psychological toll of this vulnerability is immense. You can defend against the paddle through good behavior. You can avoid the whip by following rules, but you can't defend against this, not really. Your body isn't yours to defend. The best you can do is make yourself less appealing as a target, stay alert to dangerous situations, and hope that your particular master and his guests aren't interested. Female slaves sometimes form protective alliances, older women watching out for younger ones, creating warning systems and safe spaces where possible. There's a veteran house slave, maybe 40 years old, past the age where she attracts much attention, who's become an unofficial protector of the younger women. She teaches them tricks, how to move through rooms without drawing eyes, how to smell less appealing, how to position themselves near the mistress when dangerous guests visit. It shouldn't be necessary, but it is. The mistress of the house knows what happens, of course. Everyone knows. Sometimes she intervenes, protecting favoured slaves from her husband's or guests' attention. Sometimes she doesn't care. Sometimes she's cruel about it, punishing the slave women for attracting her husband as though they had any choice in the matter. Jealousy doesn't make rational distinctions about consent when the law doesn't recognise consent for slaves in the first place. You've learned to recognise the signs that a guest is that kind of danger. Certain looks, certain questions, the way they watch slaves move through the room. When you spot it, you adjust. Suddenly remember tasks that take you elsewhere. Position yourself near the villicus or other authority. Make yourself professionally busy in ways that suggest interruption would be inconvenient. It doesn't always work. Sometimes avoidance isn't possible. Sometimes the master directly orders a slave to attend to a guest's needs, and needs is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. Refusal isn't an option. The best you can hope for is that it's quick, that it doesn't become regular, that you can compartmentalize the experience and move forward. This is the aspect of slavery that free Romans don't talk about directly, but everyone understands. Your body is property. Property doesn't consent. The violation inherent in that reality extends into territories that make physical beatings look straightforward by comparison. You go to sleep each night grateful to have survived the day. and you wake up each morning knowing you have to do it again. The dinner party that Demetrius mentioned earlier has arrived, and the household is in controlled chaos mode. It's late afternoon, and the preparations have been underway since early morning, because apparently feeding 8 wealthy Romans requires more logistical coordination than a military campaign. You're part of the service team for tonight, which means your next several hours will be spent orchestrating a performance where one wrong move could result in very real consequences. The triclinium, the formal dining room, has been transformed. 3 couches arranged in a U-shape around low tables, cushions positioned precisely, the good tableware brought out and polished until it gleams. The floor's been swept 3 times, the lamps filled and trimmed, fresh flowers arranged in strategic locations. Everything must be perfect because the master isn't just feeding his guests, he's displaying his wealth, his taste, his household management skills. You're all props in his status performance. The kitchen is barely controlled chaos. Philippos the head cook is in his element, which means he's shouting in 2 languages simultaneously while coordinating 6 different dishes at various stages of preparation. The menu is elaborate: gustatio, appetizers, prima mensa, main course, secunda mensa, dessert, plus various side dishes, all designed to impress. The smells are incredible. Roasting meat, fresh bread, exotic spices that cost more than you're worth. You're assigned to wine service, which sounds simple until you learn that Roman dinner parties have specific rules about wine that would make modern sommeliers weep. The wine comes concentrated, basically syrup, and must be mixed with water at ratios that vary based on guest preference, time of evening, and social dynamics. Too strong suggests you're encouraging debauchery, too weak suggests cheapness. You've got multiple wine varieties, honey wine, spiced wine, and you need to remember who likes what mixed how. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman elite dinner parties could last for hours, sometimes extending from late afternoon into the middle of the night, featuring elaborate entertainment, philosophical discussion, and enough food to feed a small village. The Cena was serious business, a key venue for networking, deal-making, and social positioning. No pressure. The guests start arriving around the 9th hour, that's mid-afternoon by our modern reckoning, because Romans divided daylight into 12 hours regardless of season, making summer hours longer than winter hours, in a system that would drive modern schedulers insane. The master greets them in the atrium while you and the other serving slaves wait in position, ready to spring into action. Service begins with the gustatio, appetizers designed to stimulate appetite. You're carrying trays of olives, eggs, salad, oysters brought from the coast at tremendous expense and kept alive in tanks until moments before serving. You move through the triclinium with practiced grace, offering each guest selections while trying to be simultaneously present enough to serve and invisible enough to not interrupt conversation. This is the tricky part. Being a good slave during a dinner party means anticipating needs before they're voiced, appearing exactly when needed, and disappearing when not, maintaining perfect awareness of the room while pretending you're not really there. It's like being a highly trained ghost who occasionally materializes to refill wine cups. You pour wine for a senator. His preference is 1 part wine to 2 parts water, no honey, served in the good Aretine ware that's red and glossy, and costs more than a year of your labor. He doesn't acknowledge you. That's fine. Acknowledgement would actually be weird, would break the theatrical convention that slaves are animated furniture. You're most successful when you're most invisible. The main course arrives, and it's a production. A whole roasted pig stuffed with smaller birds presented on a massive platter that requires 2 slaves to carry. Philippos has outdone himself. The pig is surrounded by pastries shaped like fish, the whole thing dusted with expensive pepper, arranged to look simultaneously edible and artistic. The guests applaud, which is the appropriate response to food theatre. You're watching the other serving slaves coordinating wordlessly. Gaius is handling the meat carving, his knife work precise because sloppy cuts would be an insult. Another slave manages bread service. The ornatrix, pulled from her usual duties, assists with presenting special dishes. Everyone has a role. Everyone's moving in synchronized choreography that we rehearsed this afternoon. Here's your quirky detail. Wealthy Romans sometimes employed nomenclatores, slaves whose job was literally to whisper guest names to their masters at parties, because remembering people is hard when you know hundreds of important citizens. Your master doesn't have one. but you've seen them at other households, shadowing their owners like social anxiety support animals. A guest snaps his fingers, the universal signal for slave, attend me now. You glide over, wine pitcher ready. He wants more wine, stronger this time. You pour, adjusting the ratio to maybe 1-to-1, watching his face for confirmation that you got it right. He nods slightly. Success. You've correctly interpreted a finger snap and a facial expression. This is your life. The conversation flows around you. Politics, philosophy, gossip about mutual acquaintances. You're hearing things you shouldn't know, learning information that could be valuable or dangerous depending on context. Slaves are the worst-kept secret of Roman elite privacy. We're everywhere, hearing everything, trusted to be discreet because what choice do we have? Sometimes guests forget we're human enough to understand speech. Sometimes they just don't care. Historians still argue whether slaves at elite dinner parties were genuinely invisible to guests, or if free Romans consciously performed the fiction of invisibility for social reasons. From where you're standing, carefully not spilling wine on a senator's toga, the distinction seems academic. Whether they truly don't see you or are pretending not to, the result is the same. You're furniture that serves. The meal continues through courses, fish and exotic sauces, vegetables prepared in ways that probably violate natural law, mushrooms that cost more per pound than slaves cost per year. Between courses, entertainers perform, musicians, dancers, someone reciting poetry. You keep serving, keep moving, keep being professionally invisible. And then it happens. Gaius, carrying a platter of something delicate, catches his foot on the edge of a couch. The platter tilts. Everyone freezes. Time slows down in that way it does before disasters. The platter stabilizes. Gaius recovers. The food remains intact. Collective exhale from every slave in the room. The guests didn't even notice. They were deep in conversation about trade routes or whatever senators discuss. But you noticed. The villicus, standing in the corner supervising, noticed. That's paddling tomorrow. Guaranteed. Maybe worse if the villicus is feeling pedagogical. The fact that nothing actually spilled doesn't matter. The risk was there. The potential embarrassment of food hitting the floor in front of important guests. That's the standard you're held to. Not just success, but flawless success with zero close calls. You continue serving, hyper-aware now that danger is everywhere. The wine is slippery. The floors are smooth. The guests are reclining on couches in positions that make serving them geometrically complicated. One wrong move and you're the evening's cautionary tale. Dessert arrives. Honey cakes, fresh fruit, nuts, sweet wine. The guests are getting louder now. The wine and full bellies making them expansive and philosophical. One starts quoting Ovid. Another counters with Virgil. They're showing off for each other, displaying cultural refinement through memorized poetry. You refill wine cups, clear empty plates, manage the complex choreography of serving without interrupting. Your feet hurt. Your back hurts. You've been standing and moving for hours, maintaining perfect posture and professional demeanor despite exhaustion. The guests will feast for several more hours yet. You'll serve them all. This is the performance. Them displaying wealth and culture. You enabling that display through invisible labor. Everyone plays their role. The show must go on. The dinner party finally ends around midnight, and after another hour of frantic cleaning, you collapse into your sleeping space, utterly exhausted. But sleep doesn't come immediately, because lying next to you in the dark is Julia. Not little Julia, the 8-year-old, but Julia, the kitchen slave you've been sharing sleeping space with for the past 2 years. She's your partner, your contubernum, which is the Roman term for slave marriage that isn't actually marriage because slaves can't legally marry, but everyone pretends it's close enough. She shifts closer in the darkness, her hand finding yours. This small touch, this moment of human connection, is what keeps you sane some days. You're both property, both exhausted, both facing another identical day tomorrow. But right now, in the quiet darkness, you're just two people who chose each other within the narrow confines of choice available to slaves. Here's the thing about slave relationships. They exist in a legal void. You can't marry. Marriage is a legal contract between citizens, and property can't enter contracts. You can't make formal promises about the future because neither of you owns your future. Your master could sell one of you tomorrow, separate you permanently, and there's absolutely nothing you could do about it. Love under these conditions is an act of either tremendous courage or tremendous stupidity, and you're not sure which. You and Julia formed your contubernium with the master's permission, which was required and could be revoked at any time. Some masters encourage slave partnerships. Stable slaves are productive slaves, and the promise of family creates another binding tie that reduces flight risk. Other masters forbid it entirely, viewing emotional attachments as distractions from work. You got lucky. Your master doesn't particularly care what slaves do in their personal time as long as the work gets done. The relationship isn't recognized by law, but it's recognized by the slave community. You went through the informal ceremony, nothing official, just an acknowledgement among the other slaves that you two are partnered now. Julia moved her sleeping mat next to yours. You pooled your peculium resources. You became, in every way that matters to actual humans, a couple. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Children born to slave parents belonged entirely to the master, not to their biological parents. The mother's status determined the child's status, so any child Julia might have would be the master's property from birth. You'd have no legal claim to your own offspring, no rights as a father, no ability to prevent your child from being sold away from you. This reality sits between you, sometimes like a third presence. You want children. That natural human desire doesn't disappear just because you're enslaved. But wanting children means creating new slaves, bringing new people into bondage, loving someone you can't protect and don't legally own. It's a moral calculation that keeps you awake some nights. Julia is already pregnant. 3 months along, showing just enough that the other slaves know even if the master hasn't noticed yet. You haven't discussed it much. What is there to say? The child will come, will be born into slavery, will belong to the master. You'll love them anyway, because what else can you do? Humans are built to love their children regardless of circumstance, even impossible circumstances. You're terrified. The mortality rate for childbirth is high enough among free women with access to medical care. For slave women, higher. And if Julia survives, when Julia survives, you correct yourself. You'll have a child to protect in a world that views children as property appreciating in value as they grow old enough to work. Other slave families in the household navigate this reality in various ways. There's an older couple who've been together 15 years, have 3 children currently in the household, and 2 who were sold away years ago. The pain of those sales still shows in their eyes when they talk about it. The master needed money, or the children reached an age where their value was high enough to make selling them profitable, and just like that, they were gone. Historians still argue whether slave families provided emotional support that made bondage more bearable, or if forming families simply created more vulnerability and pain. The answer, lying here next to Julia feeling her breathing in the darkness, is definitely both. She makes life worth living, and simultaneously gives the master another tool to control you. Love is leverage in a system built on leverage. You steal moments together when you can. A few minutes in the courtyard after the midday meal, sitting close and talking about nothing important. The walk to and from the public fountain when you're both sent on errands at the same time. These quiet moments in the dark before sleep, hands clasped, existing as a couple in the only space the day allows. There's tenderness here that the master doesn't see, and probably wouldn't understand if he did. The way Julia knows you're having a bad day from your posture alone. The way you save her slightly better bread when you can. The jokes you share in glances across the courtyard, communication that requires no words. You've built a life together in the margins of slavery, in the spaces between labour. Here's a quirky detail that showcases both Roman pragmatism and cruelty. Some masters actively encourage slave breeding, viewing it as profitable livestock management. They'd pair slaves deliberately, reward pregnant women with better food or lighter duties, create incentive structures around reproduction. Your master hasn't gone that far, but you know households where it happens, where slave women are essentially brood mares producing new property. Little Julia, the 8-year-old who cries for her sold-away mother, is a constant reminder of what could happen. She was separated from her mother last year when the mother's owner sold the whole household after his death. The girl ended up here, alone, motherless, learning to navigate slavery without the parent who might have helped her through it. You and Julia, your partner, have unofficially adopted her, trying to provide some stability, some care. When your child is born, you'll understand her mother's pain even more acutely. The community of slaves creates ersatz families, networks of care and support that transcend blood relation. The older slaves mentor younger ones. Couples look out for each other. Someone's always keeping an eye on the children, making sure they eat, teaching them the survival skills their slave parents wish they didn't need to learn. It's family built from necessity and choice simultaneously. You think about free Romans and their families, the legal protections, the inheritance rights, the ability to make decisions about your children's futures. A father has patria potestas, absolute power over his household, his children, their lives. You have nothing. You can love your child, but you can't protect them, can't make choices for them, can't even guarantee you'll be allowed to stay near them. Julia's hand squeezes yours in the darkness. You squeeze back. Tomorrow you'll both wake up and work and survive another day. And maybe that's enough. These moments, this connection, this stubborn insistence on love despite everything. Your family exists in defiance of the system that says it can't. That has to count for something. Morning light filters through the window slit, and before the day's labour truly begins, you join the other household slaves at the lararium for the daily devotions. The master's family gathers too. This is one of the few moments where slaves and free people occupy the same space for the same purpose, though don't mistake that for equality. You're all honouring the household's protective spirits, but you're doing it from very different positions in the cosmic and social hierarchy. The master leads the brief ceremony, sprinkling grain and wine on the small altar, murmuring prayers to the lares and penates, those household guardian spirits who theoretically protect everyone under this roof, slave and free alike. You bow your head, mouth the appropriate responses, and wonder if the gods actually distinguish between people and property when deciding who to protect. The theological implications keep you up some nights. Here's the thing about religion when you're enslaved. It's one of the only areas where you have something approaching personal autonomy. The master can control your labour, your body, your time, your movement through physical space. But your thoughts during prayer, your private devotions, your personal relationship with whatever deities you choose to honour, that space is theoretically yours, though even that comes with asterisks and conditions. You participate in the household cult because you have to. It's expected, supervised, part of your duties as a member of this household. But you also have your own religious practices, your own gods, your own spiritual life that exists parallel to and sometimes in tension with the master's official religion. It's a delicate balance, maintaining both without letting either side know you're hedging your bets cosmically. After the household devotions end and the master's family disperses, you have a few moments before work begins in earnest. You slip to a small alcove, barely a niche in the wall near the slave quarters, where someone long ago scratched a crude image of Fortuna, goddess of luck and fortune. Someone else added symbols you recognize from your homeland before you were enslaved. The alcove has become an unofficial shrine for slave spirituality, a place where you can pray to gods who might actually care about people in your position. You leave a small offering, just a crust of bread because it's all you can spare, and whisper a prayer, not for freedom, because that seems too ambitious, too unlikely for divine intervention, just for Julia's safe childbirth, for the baby to be healthy, for tomorrow to be survivable, modest prayers for modest hopes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Slaves in the Roman Empire practiced a wide variety of religions, often maintaining connections to their homeland's spiritual traditions, while also adopting Roman practices. The religious landscape was remarkably diverse, and masters generally didn't care what gods their slaves worshipped, as long as it didn't interfere with work or household religious obligations. Other slaves have their own practices. Gaius honours Egyptian deities. He was born in Alexandria before being enslaved and brought to Rome. He's fashioned a tiny figurine of Isis that he keeps hidden in his personal box, taking it out for prayers when he thinks nobody's watching. Demetrius, being Greek, has a philosophical approach to religion that involves a lot of muttering about different schools of thought and very little actual worship, which is very on brand for Greek pedagogue slaves. The kitchen slave who cares for little Julia practices something older, darker, mysteries she won't discuss, rituals involving blood and grain, and whispered words in a language you don't recognize. You don't ask. Everyone's entitled to their spiritual coping mechanisms. The quirky detail here is that slaves had access to certain religious festivals and celebrations that provided brief respites from normal life. The Saturnalia in December was particularly weird. A festival where social norms inverted, masters served slaves dinner, gambling was allowed, And for a few days, the world turned temporarily upside down before snapping back to horrible normal. It's like the universe's pressure relief valve, letting slaves taste freedom just long enough to make returning to bondage extra bitter. You're thinking about this because Saturnalia is coming up in a few weeks. The master will host the traditional role reversal dinner where he and his family serve you and the other slaves. You'll get to recline at the table, eat good food, maybe even drink wine that hasn't been watered down to oblivion. For one evening, you'll be treated like people. And then morning comes and you're back to being property, the brief taste of humanity making the return to slavery even more psychologically complex. Historians still argue whether festivals like Saturnalia helped maintain social stability by providing controlled release of tension, or if they actually increased resentment by showing slaves what they could have but don't. The answer is probably yes to both. Your religious life provides something the master can't fully control: internal freedom, mental space, connection to something beyond this immediate horrible reality. When you pray, you're exercising a kind of agency that exists independent of ownership. Your thoughts are yours, your faith is yours, your spiritual identity can't be bought or sold. Unless, of course, you're forced to participate in religious ceremonies you don't believe in, which happens. Or if your master forbids certain practices he finds threatening or foreign, or if expressing your faith too openly gets you labelled as troublesome. So even this space isn't entirely free, but it's freer than most areas of slave life. There are underground religious movements too. Rumours of slaves converting to New Eastern mystery religions, whispers about a Jewish sect that preaches radical equality before their God, stories about secret gatherings where slaves worship together away from masters' eyes. You're not involved in any of that, too risky, but you hear things. Information flows through the slave network like water through aqueducts. The morning prayer at the lararium, the secret offerings at the slave shrine, the private conversations with gods who might listen, these create a spiritual ecosystem that runs parallel to your physical servitude. You exist simultaneously as property in the material world and as a person with spiritual agency in the religious sphere. It's compartmentalization at a cosmic level. You're not sure the gods listen. You're not sure they care. But prayer is free, costs nothing except the time it takes to whisper words into the universe. And hope is a renewable resource that somehow keeps regenerating, despite overwhelming evidence that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to your suffering. So, you pray. You honor the household gods because you must. You worship your own gods because you choose to. And somehow, in that space between obligation and choice, you maintain something resembling spiritual autonomy. The alcove shrine is crude, unauthorized, probably would be destroyed if the master noticed it. But it's yours. This tiny sacred space, these whispered prayers, this connection to something beyond slavery. It's a small freedom in a life defined by lack of freedom. You'll take what you can get. The dinner party finally, mercifully ends around the third hour of the night. That's roughly 9 p.m. in modern reckoning, though it feels like 3 a.m. in terms of exhaustion. The guests stumble out, various levels of drunk, their own slaves supporting them toward litters or helping them walk home through Rome's dark, dangerous streets. You think you're done. You think you can finally sleep. You're adorably optimistic sometimes. You, wine service, the master's retiring to his study with correspondence, stay available. The Villicus delivers this news with the casual indifference of someone who gets to sleep tonight while you don't. The master, apparently still energized from hosting, has decided this is the perfect time to handle his business affairs. He'll want wine. He might want snacks. He'll definitely want a slave standing in the corner ready to fetch, carry, adjust lamps, or perform whatever random task occurs to him while he's reading through wax tablets. You've been on your feet since before dawn. That's roughly 16 hours of continuous work. Your back hurts, your feet hurt, parts of you hurt that you didn't know could hurt. But the master needs wine service, so you follow him to the tablinum with a fresh pitcher and cup, taking your position near the wall where you'll stand, not sit, never sit, until he dismisses you. He settles into his chair, starts reading correspondence by lamplight. You stand. Minutes pass like hours. He occasionally sips wine without looking at you, raises his cup for refills without. Acknowledging your existence, continues reading. Your furniture again. Functional furniture that needs to remain upright and alert despite every muscle screaming for rest. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wealthy Romans regularly stayed up late into the night, their activities facilitated by oil lamps and the labour of slaves who couldn't refuse nighttime duties. The concept of working hours didn't exist. You worked whenever the master needed you, which could easily extend to midnight or beyond. An hour passes, maybe two. Time gets weird when you're this tired, standing in flickering lamplight while trying not to sway on your feet. The master finally looks up, notices you're still there as though this surprises him, and waves dismissal. You escape back toward the slave quarters, thinking maybe finally you can sleep. But the night isn't done with you yet. There's a rotation system for night watch. Someone needs to be alert for emergencies, fires being the primary concern in a city built largely of wood and lit by open flames. Tonight is your turn to take the late shift, which means another 4 hours of staying awake, walking periodic circuits of the household, checking for fire hazards, listening for unusual sounds, making sure nothing threatens the master's property while he sleeps peacefully upstairs. You want to cry. You don't, because tears are pointless and you're too tired anyway, but the desire is there. You find the other night watch slave, an older man named Sextus who's been doing this for years, and he gives you a look of pure sympathy. Dinner party night? You nod. Jupiter's balls, that's rough. Here, I saved you some bread from dinner. He hands over a chunk of bread that he definitely didn't save from dinner. He probably sacrificed part of his own meagre meal. The small kindness hits harder than it should, but that's what exhaustion does. You eat the bread, feel marginally more human, and settle into the night watch routine. The household is finally quiet. Most slaves sleeping in cramped quarters while you patrol empty corridors. The city outside is louder than you'd expect. Despite the wheeled cart ban during day, nighttime Rome is full of delivery vehicles, late-night revelers, criminals conducting business, animals roaming, general chaos that never quite stops. You can hear it all through the walls, arguments, laughter, the occasional scream that might be revelry or might be violence, hard to tell. Here's your quirky detail about Roman nighttime activities. Wealthy citizens sometimes held late-night symposia, drinking parties with philosophical discussions that could extend until dawn. Guess who stayed up serving wine and listening to increasingly incoherent debates about stoicism? That's right, slaves who definitely weren't getting paid overtime because overtime wasn't a concept, and also your property. You check the kitchen, all flames out, everything secure, check the atrium, no issues, walk through, the peristyle garden where moonlight makes everything look ghostly and beautiful in a way you're too tired to appreciate. The fountain burbles peacefully. Somewhere an owl calls. It would be almost pleasant if you weren't essentially sleepwalking through your duties. Sleep deprivation is chronic in slave life, not an occasional inconvenience. You're always operating on insufficient rest, because the master's schedule determines everything, and rest is a luxury, not a right. You've learned to function in this constant state of exhaustion, developed the ability to stay upright and alertish through sheer willpower and survival instinct. But it takes a toll. Your thinking gets fuzzy by late night. Your coordination suffers. You've dropped things during late-night service that you'd never drop when properly rested. Your immune system weakens from chronic sleep deficit, making you more susceptible to illness. Your mood darkens. Everything hurts more when you're this tired. The master is snoring upstairs. You can hear it faintly through the ceiling. He's getting his full 8 hours, comfortable in his bed with his wife. No concerns about tomorrow beyond which toga to wear. Meanwhile, you're pacing his hallways, fighting to stay conscious, ensuring his property remains secure. The inequity is so stark it's almost funny. Almost. Sextus appears for the watch rotation. You've made it to the halfway point, which means you can hand off to him and finally sleep. Except you'll be up again in maybe 4 hours for the morning routine. So you're looking at 4 hours of sleep maximum, probably less given how long it takes to actually fall asleep when you're this wired from exhaustion. Go, Sextus says. I've got it. Sleep while you can. You stumble back to the slave quarters, navigate to your sleeping mat by feel in the darkness. Julia is already asleep, her breathing steady. You lie down next to her, every muscle relaxing with the relief of horizontal orientation. Tomorrow, technically today since it's well past midnight, you'll wake up exhausted and do it all again. The day after that, same thing. This is your life. Labour without rest, duty without reprieve, service that extends to whatever hours the master requires. Historians still argue whether chronic sleep deprivation among slaves constituted intentional control mechanism or was merely incidental to the economic exploitation. From where you're lying, finally prone after 20 hours upright, the distinction seems academic. Intentional or not, exhaustion is control. Tired people don't rebel. Tired people can barely think beyond the next required task. You're asleep before you can finish that thought, dropping into unconsciousness like a stone into water. 4 hours from now, the nightmare begins again. But for now, for this brief window, you're horizontal and unconscious, and technically resting. It'll have to be enough. You wake up from your inadequate 4 hours of sleep to face another, identical day, and while you're going through the morning routine, basin, tunic, terrible breakfast, your mind wanders to the question that haunts every slave who isn't completely broken. How do you get out of this? Manumission, the formal freeing of slaves, actually happens. You've seen it. You know freedmen, former slaves who've achieved that quasi-free status, so it's possible. The question is whether it's possible for you. There are 3 main paths to freedom, and let's rank them by probability from extremely unlikely to laughably impossible. First up, manumission through the master's will. When your master dies, he might include provisions in his will freeing certain slaves. It's actually fairly common among wealthy Romans, considered a sign of benevolence and generosity that enhances the deceased's reputation. Some masters freed dozens of slaves in their wills, creating instant communities of freedmen bound to the family through gratitude and legal obligation. The catch, and there's always a catch, is that you need to be the kind of slave the master values enough to remember fondly on his deathbed. Long-serving household slaves sometimes get this treatment. Skilled slaves who've made their masters wealthy through their labor occasionally qualify. The master's favorite body slave might be freed out of genuine affection. Yes, genuine affection can exist across the ownership boundary. It's weird and complicated, but humans are weird and complicated. You're a general laborer who scrubs floors competently. Unless you become dramatically more valuable or personally beloved in the next several decades, you're probably not making it into the will. The math is depressing. Your master owns maybe 15 slaves, and he might free 3 or 4 when he dies. Those are lottery odds, and you're not holding a winning ticket. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman law actually limited how many slaves could be freed in a master's will, with the Lex Fufia Canina in 2 BC capping the number based on the total slaves owned. Masters with 3 to 10 slaves could free half. Those with 10 to 30 could free a third. The largest estates could free at most a fifth. These limits existed because Rome was worried about being flooded with new citizens. Freed slaves automatically became Roman citizens, and somebody decided that was a problem worth legislating. Path number 2, purchase your freedom with your peculium. This is theoretically available to any slave who can accumulate enough money, which immediately makes it practically unavailable to most slaves because accumulating hundreds of denarii, when you earn maybe 2 per year, is mathematically challenging. You did the math earlier, remember that crocodile dung calculation? You're looking at centuries to save enough at current rates. But it happens. Skilled slaves who can work on the side, who build substantial peculiar through years of hustle and savings, occasionally scrape together enough to negotiate their purchase price. The master usually agrees because, honestly, receiving 800 denarii up front is economically attractive compared to the declining productivity of an aging slave. It's a transaction, pure business, your freedom reduced to a price point on a ledger. The negotiation is delicate. You approach the master, or more likely, have a respected third party approach him, with your offer. He counters. You maybe counter if you've got the funds. Eventually you reach a price that satisfies him and bankrupts you. But hey, you're free. Sort of. More on that in a moment. Some masters are generous about pricing, valuing slaves at below market rates to make freedom achievable. Others are ruthless capitalists who charge premium prices, ensuring only the most industrious slaves can afford liberation. Your master falls somewhere in the middle. He's not deliberately cruel about it, but he's not running a charity either. Market rate or nothing. Here's the quirky detail that'll make you wonder about Roman moral reasoning. Some slaves bought other slaves to build up enough peculium to purchase their own freedom. They'd buy a younger slave, train them, lease out their labor, accumulate returns on that investment, and eventually use the profits to buy themselves. It's nested exploitation as a path to liberation. capitalism eating itself in a perfectly Roman way. Path number 3. Exceptional service leading to voluntary manumission. This is the rarest route, reserved for slaves who do something extraordinary, save the master's life, perform some spectacular service that earns eternal gratitude, demonstrate such exceptional talent that the master wants to formalize a patron-client relationship. You're not holding your breath on this one. Your floor-scrubbing skills, while admirable, aren't exactly life-saving material. But you hear stories. The slave who warned his master about a political conspiracy and earned freedom as reward. The pedagogue whose students achieved such distinction that the grateful father freed their teacher. The business manager who made his master so wealthy that freedom was the appropriate thank you gift. These stories circulate through slave communities like legends, proof that liberation is possible even if improbable. Historians still argue whether manumission rates in the 1st century AD were high enough to give most slaves realistic hope of freedom, or if the system strategically freed just enough people to maintain hope without threatening the slave economy's foundation. The answer probably varies by region, household, and individual circumstances, which isn't particularly helpful when you're trying to calculate your own odds. The reality you're living is that freedom is theoretically achievable and practically distant. You could get lucky. The master could die young and include you in his will out of whimsy. You could somehow accumulate a fortune through means you haven't discovered, yet. You could perform some heroic deed that earns gratitude-based manumission. These things happen to other people, which means they could happen to you, but probably won't. So you save your peculium anyway, dropping denarii into your leather pouch like prayers into a cosmic wish fulfillment fund. You work diligently, building a reputation as reliable and competent, hoping the master notices and remembers when will writing time comes. You fantasize about unlikely scenarios where your particular skills suddenly become invaluable. You hope. Because what else is there? Despair is an option, sure, but it's not a productive one. Better to chase the improbable dream of freedom than to accept that slavery is your permanent condition. Even if the math doesn't work, even if the odds are terrible, even if freedom is more fantasy than realistic goal, the chase gives you something to work toward beyond just surviving another day. And who knows? Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe Julia's child will grow up to buy both your freedoms through some spectacular success story. Maybe the master will have a religious conversion and free everyone. Maybe you'll discover a cache of hidden treasure in the walls. Probably not. But maybe. You know several freedmen, former slaves who've achieved that strange intermediate status between slavery and full citizenship, and watching them navigate their new lives gives you a preview of what freedom actually means when you've been property. Spoiler. It's complicated, it's partial, and it comes with strings attached that bind you almost as tightly as the chains you escaped. There's Marcus Antonius Felix. That's his freedman name, taking the master's family name plus a freedom name, who runs a small bakery 3 streets over. You see him sometimes when you're on errands, and he's clearly doing better than when he was enslaved. He owns his business, keeps his profits, makes his own decisions about daily operations. But he's also still tied to his former master through bonds that are technically voluntary, but practically mandatory. The patron-client relationship is the core of how Roman freedmen exist in society. When you're freed, your former master becomes your patron, and you become his client. This isn't a casual connection. It's a formal social relationship with serious obligations on both sides. The patron provides protection, political support, potentially business opportunities, and social legitimacy. In return, you provide services, political support, money when needed, and perpetual gratitude. Felix has to greet his patron, your current master actually. They freed him 5 years ago every morning during the salutatio, that daily ritual where clients gather at their patron's house to pay respects. That's time Felix could be baking bread or managing his business, but instead he's standing in your master's atrium with other clients, waiting his turn for a brief audience, maintaining the relationship that defines his social position. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Freed slaves in Rome became Roman citizens, but with restrictions. They couldn't hold most political offices, couldn't serve in the legions, faced social stigma despite their legal status. Their children, however, were born free without restrictions, full citizens who could theoretically reach any height. This made freedmen incredibly invested in their children's success, pushing them toward education and opportunities the parents never had. The social status is the weird part. Felix is legally free, legally a Roman citizen, but socially he's still marked as former property. People know he was a slave. His freedman name advertises it. When you hear someone named Marcus Antonius anything, you know they were freed by the Antoni family. He can't escape that history, can't pretend to be born free, can't fully integrate into citizen society despite his legal status. Freeborn Romans treat freedmen with this peculiar mixture of acceptance and disdain. They're useful. Freedmen handle a lot of the empire's commercial activity, run businesses, manage properties, but they're also considered inherently inferior, tainted by their servile past, not quite real Romans, despite the citizenship paperwork. Felix navigates this constantly, balancing pride in his freedom with awareness of how others view him. The economic obligations to the patron can be substantial. If the former master needs money, he can request loans from his freedmen that everyone understands won't be repaid. If he needs political support, his freedmen show up to vote or demonstrate as directed. If he needs workers for a project, guess who's volunteering their time? The patron-client relationship is reciprocal in theory, but the power differential makes it pretty one-sided in practice. Here's the quirky detail about freedmen economics. Some became spectacularly wealthy, especially those freed with business skills and connections. Trimalchio, that famous fictional freedman from Petronius's Satyricon, is an exaggerated but not entirely unrealistic portrait. Freedmen could accumulate enormous fortunes through trade and business, sometimes becoming richer than their former masters. This wealth didn't translate into social acceptance, but it bought a lot of other things. You imagine your own life as a freedman sometimes, running through scenarios in your mind during the monotonous work. You'd keep working in some capacity. You'd need income, and your skills are domestic labour, so maybe you'd hire yourself out to multiple households, cleaning and maintaining for pay. You'd live in one of those cramped insulae apartments, finally having your own space even if it's tiny and dangerous and likely to collapse or burn down. You'd attend your former master's salutatio every morning, standing with other freedmen and freeborn clients, performing the ritual of patron-client relations. You'd contribute money to his political campaigns or business ventures when asked. You'd probably still call him Dominus, master, even though technically he's your patron now and you're free. Old habits, old language, old power dynamics don't disappear just because the legal status changed. Julia would be freed with you. You'd negotiate for that as part of your manumission terms. Insist that your family stays together. Your child would be born free if the timing works out right, or would be freed alongside you if they're born before your liberation. That child would grow up without the stigma you carry, could achieve things you never could, might look at you and wonder why you're so deferential to your patron when you're supposedly free. The legal freedom is real and meaningful. You could own property actually yours, not just a peculium subject to seizure. You could marry legally, your relationship with Julia formalized and recognized. You couldn't be beaten at someone's whim. Well, technically the patron could still punish you in certain circumstances, and freeborn Romans could abuse you with relative impunity, but it's still better than active slavery. You could potentially accumulate wealth and pass it to your children. But you'd also carry the mark of slavery, forever. The freedman name, the social stigma, the patron relationship that binds you, the knowledge that everyone you meet knows you were property once, can see it in your name and status, judges you accordingly. Historians still argue whether Roman freedmen experienced genuine upward mobility or just a slightly elevated form of subordination, and honestly, it's probably both depending on individual circumstances. You watch Felix through his bakery window sometimes, kneading dough with the same motions you learned when you briefly worked kitchen duties. He's free. He owns his business. He keeps his profits. But he's also still showing up to your master's house every morning, still performing deference, still bound by invisible chains that replace the literal ones. Is that freedom? It's more freedom than you have now. It's legal personhood, economic opportunity, family legitimacy, the chance for your children to be fully Roman. But it's not the clean break you might imagine when you fantasize about liberation. It's freedom with conditions, citizenship with asterisks, a partial liberation that's still better than bondage, but falls short of the unqualified freedom that freeborn Romans take for granted. You'd take it anyway. In a heartbeat, you'd accept manumission, with all its complications and continued obligations. Because even partial freedom beats complete slavery, even freedom with strings beats being property. Even the complicated life of a freedman beats the straightforward horror of being owned. So you keep saving your peculium, 5 denarii at a time, dreaming of the day when you too will need your own bread in your own shop, still bound to your patron but legally human, still marked by slavery but technically free, still not quite equal but absolutely better than now. Freedom, you're learning, is a spectrum rather than a binary. And you're ready to climb as far up that spectrum as Roman society will allow. The day is finally, mercifully ending. The sun has set over Rome's 7 hills, painting the sky in colours you're too exhausted to appreciate, deep purples and oranges that fade into the darkness descending over the eternal city. You've survived another day. That's the victory, small and bitter as it is. You've made it from dawn to dusk without being beaten, without being sold, without catastrophic disaster. By the standards of slave life, that counts as a good day. The evening routine unfolds with the same practiced efficiency as the morning one. You help prepare and serve the master's dinner. Nothing as elaborate as that party, just family dining tonight. You clean up afterward, working with the other slaves in that coordinated dance you've perfected through repetition. The household winds down for the night, free people retreating to their comfortable beds while slaves finish the endless tasks that make comfortable beds possible. You're in the atrium one last time, doing a final sweep by lamplight, when you pause for just a moment. The impluvium reflects the night sky through the compluvium above, stars appearing in the water's surface like promises of something beyond this immediate reality. The fountain in the peristyle garden murmurs its endless conversation with itself. Somewhere in the distance you can hear the city settling into its nocturnal rhythm, the sounds changing but never stopping, Rome's heartbeat continuing through darkness. Tomorrow will be identical to today. You know this with absolute certainty. You'll wake before dawn in the same cramped quarters. You'll fight for space at the same basin. You'll eat the same terrible breakfast. You'll scrub the same floors, serve the same people, perform the same endless labour. The day after that will be the same again. And the day after that. This is your life, a cycle of servitude that repeats with mechanical precision until death or manumission breaks the pattern. Here's your final historical fact. The average life expectancy for Roman slaves was probably somewhere in the 30s or 40s, notably lower than free citizens. You're in your 20s now. You've got maybe another decade or 2 of this if you're lucky, less if you're not. And then what? If you die enslaved, you'll be buried in a mass grave with other slaves, maybe marked with a crude stone if the master's feeling generous, probably forgotten within a generation. Your life will have been labour, nothing but labour, from childhood to death. But here's the thing, and you think about this as you finish your sweep and head toward the slave quarters, you're still human. The law says you're property, society treats you as such, but you know better. You love Julia, you worry about your unborn child, you save coins hoping for freedom, you pray to gods who might listen. You help young Marcus navigate this horrible system. You share jokes with Gaius. You find moments of beauty in fountain sounds and starlit water. They can own your body, control your time, dictate your labour. But your thoughts while you work, those are yours. The love you feel, that's yours. The hope you maintain despite terrible odds, yours. The small kindnesses you share with other slaves, those are acts of rebellion disguised as humanity, proof that you're still a person despite everything the system does to convince you otherwise. You reach the slave quarters, navigating by feel in the darkness. Julia is already on your shared sleeping mat, and you lie down beside her carefully, trying not to disturb her rest. Her hand finds yours automatically, that familiar connection that makes this bearable. Tomorrow you'll both wake up and do it again, and somehow, impossibly, you'll survive it. You'll find the small joys hidden in the margins of horror. You'll maintain your humanity in a system designed to strip it away. The city outside continues its endless noise, arguments, celebrations, commerce, life happening in all its chaotic glory. You're part of that life, even as a slave. You're part of Rome's story, even if nobody will write your name in the histories. Your labour builds this civilization, maintains these households, enables the leisure and luxury that free Romans enjoy. You're invisible in the narrative, but essential to the reality. Your breathing slows, matching Julia's rhythm. Sleep comes gradually, pulling you down into darkness more welcoming than the darkness of your waking life. Tomorrow waits with all its familiar horrors and small mercies. But for now, for these brief hours, you're horizontal and unconscious and temporarily free from consciousness of your condition. Another day survived, another night earned, another morning coming whether you're ready for it or not. The stars above the city continue their slow rotation across the sky, indifferent to human suffering and human joy alike. The household settles into the quiet breathing of sleep. Masters in their beds, slaves on their mats, everyone temporarily equal in unconsciousness. The night watch continues their rounds, protecting property and people without distinction, because fire doesn't care about legal status when it burns. And somewhere in the slave quarters, you dream. Maybe you dream of freedom, of walking through Rome's streets without the master's seal, of keeping the money you earn, of watching your children grow up unowned. Maybe you dream of home, wherever that was before slavery, the place you barely remember but can't quite forget. Maybe you dream of nothing at all, your exhausted mind finally blessedly quiet. The dreams don't change reality. Morning will come, the cycle will continue, slavery will remain slavery. But dreams are free, the one luxury no master can tax or confiscate or control. So, you dream. There in the darkness, your hand in Julia's, your child growing in her womb, your life stretching ahead in days of labour and nights of rest. This is what daily life was like for a Roman slave in the 1st century AD. Endless work punctuated by brief moments of humanity. Systematic dehumanization met with stubborn insistence on personhood. A legal status that denied your worth existing alongside a lived experience that proved it. The contradiction never resolves, never makes sense, never stops being both brutal and somehow survivable. You sleep now, there in ancient Rome, in a world that ended 2,000 years ago but whose structures and inequalities echo through history into our present. The details change, the names of the oppressed, the mechanisms of exploitation, the justifications offered for why some people deserve freedom while others deserve bondage. But the fundamental truth remains constant across millennia. Some people have always claimed ownership of others, and those others have always maintained their humanity despite it. Rest now. Let the weight of the day drift away like smoke from extinguished lamps. Tomorrow will bring its challenges, but tomorrow isn't here yet. For now, there's only this moment, breath moving in and out, heartbeat steady and strong, Julia's warmth beside you, the gift of sleep descending like a blessing. The eternal city sleeps around you, and you sleep within it, one small life among millions, one small story in history's endless narrative. Your life matters, even if the histories won't record it. Your love matters, even if the law won't recognize it. Your humanity matters, even if the system denies it. Sleep well, dreamer. Rest easy. Tomorrow comes soon enough, but tonight you've earned this peace.